Good evening, everybody who makes it to this or catches the replay. This is my farewell to YouTube last video, 2 of 2. So, unlike the last video, I'm going to use a lot more graphic representations for things in this video to illustrate different things I've gone over throughout the past. As well as how it would affect you when the future situation that's on its way, that's inbound, even as I speak these words, finally arrives, which could be literally any time. With everything going on in the news reporting, I just want everyone to understand that this has already been going on for many, many decades, in that you've had all of these different forces, these Trojan shock armies infiltrating our nation through the borders, also through the airports and even through the ports, and also bringing in their full complement of logistics and equipment through the Chi-Com-owned CCP regime ports, which are then brought out via CCP-friendly truck drivers or trucking companies that are either shell companies of theirs that they own by proxy or have sympathies for the CCP. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the craziness, some of this insanity that we see in the news reporting. Of course, the situation in the South there is way out of control. It's far beyond any hope of turning around. It's already out of whack. I mean, there's not enough personnel to be able to handle something like that, and it's totally being overflowed, just flooded completely with God knows who. And these could be Trojan shock forces on their next deployment, or reinforcements to complete topping off the forces that are already here in huge numbers. Take the students, for instance. You can't even get an exit visa out of China to be a student in a foreign nation unless you've had prior PLA or paramilitary service in one of the many paramilitary branches of China. So that means that any or all of them could be active forces. So that's just the student visa holders. That's not even counting everybody that's been slipping through the borders, all those that are disguised as workforce members, whether that be construction crews or business people or whatever. Of course, I'm not saying that about every last single one, of course, because, you don't know who is who. But I think I represented that very well in my audiobook with my one of my main characters, the PLA character, the Private Lee Chung. He was basically a rendition of me if I were a Chi-Com, insofar as the introspective nature of this character and how he's always thinking deeply about things. That I put a lot of aspects of myself into that character. I really put aspects of myself in a lot of different characters, but the most were put into that character because I too was part of an occupation force over in the Middle East. So I could relate very well to the experiences that Private Lee Chung eventually went through in some instances. So I'm going to greet everybody that's in here. I think I saw Into the Fray in here. Welcome. Everybody, welcome to my last stream. I'm going to try and do this for a while because I have a lot to cover, and I want to make sure I can really get everything in before I'm done making videos on the tubes. Howdy, Into the Fray. Great to see you and everybody else who's here that hasn't said anything yet. As for the story about the Kinzhal missile being shot down by the Patriot, that is the most ludicrous thing I think I've ever heard them come up with, besides the Ghost of Kiev. I will never forget that one for the rest of my life. That was a crazy narrative. And that also was an old wives' tale, or a fish tale, if you will. That didn't happen. Same thing with Snake Island. That didn't happen either, because everybody there surrendered. Anyways, the whole thing with the Patriot system is that it is an old system that's been upgraded, and even the latest iteration of it can only do so much. I mean, we're talking about a roughly Mach 4 missile that has a limited radar field. I mean, we're talking only a few hundred miles tops for the radar field. So it can only cover a very limited area to begin with. And then not only that, but we're talking about a missile, this Kinzhal, that is Mach 10, which is so fast, many thousands of miles an hour, much faster than the 3,100 of the Patriot system. It's like trying to knock a bullet out of the air with a tennis ball. I'm going to quote that from somebody. I saw a quote from somebody in a comment they left where they said that, and I thought that was the coolest way to illustrate the futility of such a thing, because it basically is just like doing that. And not only that, but it would be like trying to throw a tennis ball at a bullet that is traveling in an unpredictable flight trajectory. It's bobbing and weaving in all these different patterns. So no, there's no such thing as a Patriot system being able to shoot down a hypersonic weapon. That's total lunacy. There's other nations that use the Patriot system, and it's mediocre at best. I mean, take the Saudis, for instance. They've been having a lot of issues with trying to protect refineries and other key areas in Saudi from the Houthis, and who use rudimentary missiles, and rockets, and, they're having a hard time with that, I mean, so we're talking about a hypersonic weapon. I mean, at the very most, these Patriot systems, I mean, they're good. I mean, they're not the worst thing, but they're not the best system either. I mean, they're mediocre. I mean, they can shoot down aircraft and they can shoot down subsonic missiles because, their target has to be traveling slow enough where the radar system can track it and get a lock and then get a missile out of the tube and actually be able to intercept whatever it is they're trying to shoot down. A hypersonic missile is going to move through that area quite fast, and most likely it's not going to move through the area at all, depending on how many of these Patriot systems are even, deployed and where they're deployed at. It might not even pass through the radar field because it might be going for a different target in another area that's not protected. And even if it is, the real reporting is actually quite the opposite of what the news media is claiming, in that, I saw this on the Duran channel, and I believe it, because the Patriot systems are being destroyed one by one, and 30 of them were destroyed within 2 minutes by Kinzhals. The Kinzhal is the one doing the destroying. It's not the Patriot system. The Patriot systems are being destroyed by the Kinzhals. The Russians are taking out the air defense systems because they're getting ready to do a major offensive, because that's the only thing that they could be doing. And I'm talking about getting rid of any type of air defense systems to where they can use their aircraft a lot more loosely than they've been doing. I mean, they have been using aircraft, but they've been using them, very sparingly and from the safety of behind their own lines, where they have their own air defense network protecting them. So Russia has this integrated air defense network, very advanced. We're talking S-500s, S-400s, S-300s, the latest iteration of the S-300s, which are pretty good, all the way down to man-portable air defense systems at the very smallest level. So we're talking the capability to intercept everything from low-flying drones and certain types of rocket artillery, like the HIMARS rockets, because they move slow enough to be intercepted by air defense, and the Russians have been shooting some of those down. So we're talking about the capability to shoot down everything from drones to helicopters to jet aircraft to missiles, certain types of missiles, not all missiles, but most missiles and rockets, all the way up to the capability to shoot down high-flying stealth bombers and satellites with the S3 or with the S-500. So we don't have really an integrated air defense system. I mean, we have Stingers and we have the Patriot. And then, of course, they have the THAAD system, but there's only so many of those, and those are made for trying to knock down ICBMs. And, they're mediocre at that job. They're not the best, but, they might be able to get a few standard ICBMs. See, the difference between a hypersonic and a regular ICBM, they're both hypersonic in terms of the speed they travel, but the thing that makes hypersonic missiles so revolutionary in warfare that I don't think people are understanding is their flight trajectory and how they bob and weave and move in unpredictable patterns at such a high rate of speed, and they're still deadly accurate because they still hit, within a few meters of their intended target, which is incredibly accurate. So, when they talk about, shooting down ICBMs, an ICBM has a flight trajectory that's highly predictable. It goes up and it comes down. They already know the arc of the ICBM when it releases its warheads and where they're going to go. I mean, it's very predictable when compared to, and they even have a hard time shooting those down, like with the THAAD system and such, But, they deployed the Patriot system during the first Gulf War, and they did it for a specific reason. They did it for psychological reasons to keep Israel from getting involved in the conflict, because Saddam Hussein was trying to attack them with Scud missiles, which are very basic, very simple ballistic missiles, short-range ballistic missiles. Saddam Hussein was trying to attack them and get them to fight alongside the Arab partners, which would fracture the coalition because the Arab partners didn't like Israel, and it would have destroyed the entire coalition. So what happened was that the American regime put Patriot missiles there, claiming that they could protect them from Scuds, when in fact that's actually not really true. And in later documentaries about the first Gulf War, even U.S. officials, former officials from the time, claimed that it was more for psychological reasons to give the impression that we were there to, we had their back and we would protect them from these attacks. And, what really occurred was that not that the Patriot system shot down Scuds, but that there were specialized Scud hunting special forces teams that went into Iraq looking for these Scud missile launchers. That's what really, slowed down the attacks. It wasn't the fact that the Patriot missile systems were deployed there to protect Israel, because that, again, is a mediocre system made to shoot down aircraft and maybe subsonic missiles, drones, helicopters. It's not really intended to be used against, it certainly can't shoot down hypersonics, and it damn sure can't shoot down ordinary ballistic missiles, which have predictable flight trajectories. So we're talking about a system that I guess you could say is maybe the contemporary of like an earlier iteration of like the S-300. It's in that weight class. It's punching in that weight class in terms of like the range of the missiles, the abilities, the capabilities of the radar, the range of it. It's punching in that weight class, but it's not as good as the newest iteration of the S-300s, because the Russians spend a lot more money on their air defense systems than we do. So do the Chinese, because both of those nations have highly advanced, highly integrated air defense systems. That's just something we never put a lot of money into. We focused instead on providing the lion's share of our air defense with fighter jets and interceptors. We didn't really put a lot of money into air defense systems, ground-based systems. Instead, we focused on fighter jets. So everything I've ever warned people about is coming to pass in this crazy news cycle we watch every day. All these scenarios I created about these Trojan shock armies, you see them all getting into place. This has been ongoing. It's just not been reported until lately. This has been going on for decades. Never forget that. Never, ever forget that this has been going on for decades. The CCP purchased properties to get their Trojan shock armies ready for their deployment areas, for their staging areas, and their jump off points for the interior part of the invasion. So, you have two sets of these types of so-called immigrants coming in. You have the class of immigrants that's coming in from predominantly like third world nations, like we're talking like Africa and, some Middle Eastern nations, like Haiti and some Central American nations. Those are a different class from the ones that are coming in from like China and Russia and their traditional allied nations. Those are different. They're coming for a whole different reason, whereas like in my civil conflict docuseries, if you all remember, I had something called Foreign Volunteers, which fought alongside of the regime forces, because the military fractured and went to different factions. So when you had the regime forces, they had both woke militias and foreign volunteers, which they recruited out of the refugee centers. Now, those foreign volunteers were your third world illegals that are coming. And, whereas your Chi-Com and Russian and, perhaps Belarusian and North Korean and Pakistani, those are part of the coalition that's going to invade and take us over. Now, they're here for their own reasons, and they have their own installations, because CCP regime properties, yes, those will be allowed, not just for Chinese forces to base their troops on, but also their allies. Of course, China's going to allow their allies to use their properties. That there's a whole coalition involved in this. So, again, I said I was going to do a lot of visuals, and I'm also going to do a lot of interactions. Now, I saw a question I missed last time from a good subscriber of mine. Her name is CMAC, I believe, and she asked a good question. She asked about prioritizing insofar as if you have to go and become a nomad, if you have to get away from a war zone. And I'm going to show aspects of this, because when I show my visuals, not only do I have concept art, But of course, I also have all my old maps, and I have even some new maps I'm going to display that I haven't shown before in any projects because I've never, really done those projects. Like, I started to make, like I said, if I ever returned to YouTube for any sort of reason, it would be to finish my sub-regional maps, my sub-regional battle maps for my larger regional Texas map. Like, I'm talking about all the little sub-battles that occurred in Texas. Now, that would be a massive undertaking to do that project, simply because there's so many forces involved in that area by the border and also inside the Trojan shock troops. That would take a very, very long time to complete. So if I ever came back to YouTube, it would only be to briefly finish that. But this is most likely going to be my last YouTube video, other than being a guest on other channels if people invite me, and besides doing community posts every so often, because of course there's always so many narratives, and I have to help people take those apart, because some of the narratives that are coming out are just insane, like the whole Patriot missile battery shooting a Kinzhal down. There's no way in hell a Mach 4 missile is going to hit something that's traveling Mach 10 and going in an unpredictable flight trajectory. That's just insane. Like, the lies just keep getting worse and worse, everybody. They just keep getting worse and worse. I know everybody feels me on that. I know everybody understands what I'm saying, because this is getting crazy. Now, this is going to be a pretty long Aaron, we helped create Iron Dome, but Iron Dome's really not all it's cracked up to be. It actually misses a lot of rockets and targets. It's not the best air defense. We really, if we put more money into it, maybe we could have had better air defense, but really and truly, Iron Dome is basically like point defense for like forward operating bases. And, in terms of like Israel, they use it to, watch their little interior borders with, Gaza and with West Bank. So they use it to try to shoot down rockets that are inbound from there, and they don't get as many, they don't have as many hits, like hit to miss ratio is like, they get a lot more misses than they get hits with that thing. It's not what it's cracked up to be. So, people talk a lot about the Iron Dome. It's really not all that impressive. Neither is the Patriot system. I mean, it's okay. Like I said, it's not the worst, but it ain't the best either. We could have done a lot better than that. That's a 40-year-old platform, and you can only upgrade old platform so much. Now, every major nation does that. China does it, Russia does it, we do it. But the problem with us is that the Army hasn't really made like completely new platforms in 40 years. What we've done instead was we've taken all these old platforms that are 30, 40 years old, and we just continually upgrade them. And I'm talking about the Army. I'm not talking about other service branches. Like the Air Force, of course, got 2 new jets. They've got the F-22. They got the F-35, which is garbage. But the F-22 was a great jet. We should have continued to make that, but we don't anymore. So now we've fallen behind in the stealth race, because I don't even count the F-35 as a as a viable fighter jet, because it's supposed to be the jack of all trades, and it does none of them well. And not only that, but it includes components from China, electronic components, gives them a back door into everything. That's contrary to popular belief. We do not buy our electronic components, our microprocessors, our chips, all this stuff. We do not buy this stuff from Taiwan. We get it from the lowest bidder, and China is cheaper than Taiwan. So, of course, we buy Chinese. And that's just a fact. And that gives them a backdoor into all our higher end stuff. So they can practically shut it off or hijack it, like what they did with that F-35 here in Texas. I believe that's what it was. It was like dancing around, flopping around like a dead fish out of water. And the pilot had to eject from it. That story got forgotten pretty quickly, but I sure didn't forget about it, because, that's evidence. That's definitely evidence, of what I've been saying about them having back doors and everything. There's no way in hell that thing went haywire like that unless it was under the control of somebody else. I'm not buying it. I'm not believing that. The pilot had to eject while the thing was flopping around. I mean, come on now. That's ludicrous. When fighter jets take off, they have to be in perfect working order. Like, people don't understand all the maintenance and, the pre-maintenance services and checks, and if anything's wrong, then they do complete maintenance on it to make sure that it's safe to fly. A jet aircraft has to be in perfect shape for it to be usable. So when these jets just fall out of the sky like they've done before, or when they just, with no explanation, no rhyme or reason to it, or when they flop around like a dead fish, that is evidence of China. That's all I can say about that. And I'm sticking by that because there's no other rational explanation for why those things occur. None. Zero. So, hey, Joe, good to see you. And good to see you, Ken. Welcome, and Aaron and everybody. So, CMAC, back to what she said. She said, what about prioritizing? And she said something else about, going into buildings, how big should a group be if you're going to go into a building? Like if she was actually going to practice those building tactics that I've showed in the last video and many others, like in the community tab story reviews. Well, it all depends on the size of the building, how many people you have. If it's like a house, a 4 to 5 man stack team is enough for one home. I mean, if it's a regular house, if it's a large building, you're going to need more than one 5-man stack team, unless you just have unless you're just that brave where you want to take a chance and have to clear a massive building, with just that limited number of people. It's sort of like in the example I showed where you had that big office building. It could have been an office building, hospital, whatever. You have like a whole platoon, basically, which is like 4 to 5 squads, depending on nation. Different countries have different amounts of squads in their platoons, and different amounts of platoons in their companies. Some companies are bigger than others, and some platoons are bigger than others. You get the idea. So basically, a platoon went into that size of a building, because they took different floors of it. You had one squad grappling onto the second floor from the ground level. You had 2 squads going in on the ground, and then you had one air assault squad, basically fast rope down onto the roof, and then either go down through the door that goes down into the building, or they used a grappling hook and broke through the top floor window that way. There's different options, and it all depends on building size. But again, back to what she said about prioritizing how much weight you carry, because I mentioned that, in Iraq, we carried a lot of weight in Iraq. It wasn't a joke. I mean, we carried anywhere between 130 and 140 pounds, depending on how much, additional stuff we took with us. Sometimes we took more ammunition with us than other times. Like we'd load up even more magazines. Sometimes we took food and drink with us if we planned on being out for a long time on a mission. Sometimes, we had crew serve weapons. Like you had a squad automatic weapon, the M249 Saw, which is a light machine gun. The guy that carried that had an insane amount of weight to carry because he carried 2 extra drums full of rounds, 200 apiece, for that M249. So really, if you have to go out and become a nomad, take only what you can carry, and you have to prioritize it based on your needs. I mean, what are your needs? Do you have cache sites that you're trying to get to as a nomad to live off of, or is all you're leaving the house with what you can carry? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, is that all you're doing? Are you just leaving the house with all you can carry? That's a different situation. Then you want to go kind of food and water heavy, because you're going to need to be able to survive until you're trying to get to wherever you're thinking about going. You have to plan ahead. Like, cache sites are very important. Like I've showed in all my work, cache sites and, multiple cache sites if you can, out in nature where only you know where there are, food, medicine, water, ammunition for self-defense, all sorts of things that you think that you're going to need, living out there, hand tools, everything. You're going to want to put it all out in a cache site. That's a very vital thing to do. So, without further ado, I'm going to go to some of my visuals. Now, this is one thing that I intended on showing when I was going to do my Texas map, if I were to come back and do it. Here. Oh, hey there, Tommy. Awesome. I'm glad you made it. This might be my last one. Now you see this Texas map here. Good to see you, Tommy, man. Thanks for coming, man. It means a lot. So this Texas map, I started to make a Dallas battle map because, of course, you have the 59th Group Army up here. No, I'm sorry, 58th Group Army. Oh, no, my bad. No, it's the 59th here, 58th up there. Okay, you had the 59th Group Army here, which was like an overstrength group army, and I had them basically arrayed here where they were going to go up against some National Guard units that were trying to assemble in their armories and against clusters of civilian resistance. So they all begin, of course, on their CCP regime properties, like always, and this is the whole 59th Group Army. I'm sorry, 59th Group Army right here. And these are all the sub-units broken down into all their battalions. These are all battalions. Oh yeah, you too, Tommy. This might be my last video, man. I mean, I intend for this to be my last video. I'm going to make it a good long one because I have a lot to go over, and there's going to be a lot of visuals because I want people to really get the idea of what I've been trying to show people all these years now, because it has been years. I can't believe it. It's 3 going on 4 years now, I think. I've been on here a minute. But anyway, this would have been the Dallas battle if I would have ever continued going on with my, Texas map, because you would have had all these battles occurring like you did in my typed out stories. Like if you remember in my 3rd story, Split Up the Middle, my typed out story, there's a big battle here at Fort Hood because all of 3 Corps was engaged, and also even north of there was the 143rd Regiment of the Texas Guard up here, which is an airborne infantry regiment, and you had all 3 Corps at Fort Hood in Central Texas, and you had the 68th Group Army, and you had the Russian 2nd Combined Arms Army. So basically, what they were going to do was they pincered this entire area and basically smashed into the base. I had a lot of illustrations of that exact type of thing. Of course, my animals want to be part of this, but you guys need to get back. I'm trying to do some serious work here. So here was an illustration of Southwest, where right here where the battle was going on in Waco, you had a little picture of Southwest Waco off in the distance across the Brazos River, and you had some PL-66 Chi-Com artillery howitzers firing to support their mechanized infantry going in, and of course you see all the little orange, which is the muzzle flashes of all the resistors in the city trying to fight back, and off in the distance you have blasting. And I tried to do as good of a concept art as I feasibly could for a lot of these scenarios. I mean, of course, there's more. There's like when the cities were being carpet munitioned. Of course, I had this. It was my best sketch, my best illustration that I could come up with of smashed buildings with rubble spilling into the streets and gutted structures like this with munitions blasting chunks everywhere. And this building didn't get hit yet, but it was probably about to. This one's gutted, spilled into the street. So I had so many illustrations, and I wanted to convey some of the more tactical stuff. I mean, there was a lot of different concept art for the entire conflict. Absolutely, Tommy, just like that. You of course had, with the installation being smashed into, with, I had it just a second ago. Let me find it. I had done the map for the installation that got basically smashed into and, ripped apart, the one up in my Pacific Northwest scenario. I'm trying to find it. It was a great illustration of all of that. Oh yeah, here. You had instances like this where you had Lewis McChord right here, which is the home of the 1st Corps, getting basically attacked by the 9th Group Army of China, and also some JH-7, a squadron of JH-7 ground attack planes. And some PAP forces off in Olympia. And you had basically, all of these forces smashing through the gate like so, basically, like you had them just basically running through the gate. You see the tank shells impacting by the fence. I mean, these are not monolithic forts, these installations. These are not some fortress type places. These are just simple places with simple fencing that can easily be run through by any determined aggressor, like these Chi-Com tanks here smashing through the main gate. They just broke through this little guardrail and now they're going through the gate. They're coming up over the hill, this tank platoon here. You would have things like that occurring throughout this installation right here. And by the time, they would get in, you would have situations like this where you've got these Chi-Com forces. These are infantry forces here dismounted out of their vehicles, and they're going through the fencing here, getting past the parade field and going in. Now, these are the motor pools. These are where the vehicles are kept. I'm sorry, these are vehicles, my bad. They're not dismounts, these are vehicles, I'm sorry. They're smashing through the fencing and they're going for the motor pools and the barracks. They're gonna totally cut these guys off and not even let them be able to get out. Now here's a zoom in of this situation. Here's a zoom in right here where you've basically got these armor personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles dismounting their squads, and you see them going to clear the barracks buildings just like that. It would be so fast. It would be a matter of minutes by the time they smashed in, dismounted their forces, and started capturing buildings and motor pools, because you got to understand that these vehicles are like fire support, like mobile fire support platforms for the dismounts, because they either have heavy machine guns or they have, if they're an infantry fighting vehicle, they've got a 100 millimeter cannon and a 30 millimeter autocannon and a coax machine gun. Also 2 pods for HJ-12 anti-tank missiles on the side, similar to how the Bradley can carry 2 tow missiles. So basically, they would basically annihilate these installations if they smashed in there. These are not safe by any means. Now, understand that the Chi-Coms have their forces on CCP properties, so when you see all this madness about the border, just remember, not only is it going on now, but it's been going on for decades. And they've got their full complement of not only their troops, but also their vehicles, logistics, everything they need. So they're waiting on the green light. They're waiting on the go signal. But remember, Mystery Babylon has to have a multi-faction civil conflict, which I also made an excellent documentary conveying exactly why something like that would happen and how it would develop and what it would exactly be like, even with ideologies, leadership, and everything. I mean, that's about as real as you get. I mean, I tried to make all the leadership realistic as possible, like real people that had real jobs, that basically went off the deep end and started leading factions, It's basically, you'd have all these situations occurring like so. So now back to the whole issue of carrying gear, because again, I keep forgetting that I was supposed to answer C-Mac's question, and the question was that, how much do you carry? And again, it all very much depends on, where you're trying to go, how long it'll take you to get there, what you might have to encounter on the way. Like, are you going to have an easy way somewhere, or are you going through a populated area that you need more self-defense items like ammunition, carry a few different firearms? I mean, what are we talking here? I mean, are we talking, an easy trip where you're going through a forest or a woods or a sparsely populated area? It all depends on if you already have your logistical sites, your cache sites already pre-prepared, or if you don't. And if you're trying to go somewhere and how far away it is, you have to pack accordingly. You just have to use good sense. You have to use just basic common sense, essentially. I mean, of course, you want to bulletproof yourself as much as possible. You want to wear some sort of body armor. Yeah, welcome, Roger Dodger. Yeah, you're welcome here. And you too, Aaron. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, but this is very important. So you have to do things like that. You have to really take into account your routes. You have to plan your routes. You have to plan your, needs. How long is it going to take you? Even if you did something like, if you already had a pre-designated place you planned on evacuating to, you might want to do a test run where you basically carry the equivalent of the weight that you plan on carrying and go walk the route and see if it's something you can do or not do, if it's too much weight or if you need to adjust your load, if you will. I mean, you have to use good sense when planning these things. So of course, you have all of these concept art, all this artwork showing these things, these different types of situations and battles. I mean, you've got everything from rural to urban to suburban to installations even, I mean, so, you've got a lot of the work right here. And I wanted to show visuals because that's very important when you're talking about these types of topics, because it helps people better understand what they're really up against. So now take this, for example, let's do this. Okay. Here is a situation, you've got I don't know why my phone did this. Okay, you've got the invasion up in the Pacific Northwest going on, okay? You're in an area that is being, basically penetrated by the externals, breaking through the border regions and driving south fast. Let's say you live in a small city. This could be, small city USA. It's got a river going through it. These are major roads here, like, like state highways and such, and maybe an interstate. These are some National Guard forces that basically had an armory here in this city. They had a platoon of of infantry fighting vehicles, and let's say they had a Bradley and 3 M113s that they managed to spin up and get ready, and they have some dismounts, and these orange ones are civilians. Now, this is just one city, and now you've got some JH7s, you got a pair. You've got a Wing Loon drone, which is an armed Chinese drone, which can carry up to 12 missiles. You've got some PLL-05 assault gun mortars. You got a platoon of them. You've got a company up here of ZBD-04 infantry fighting vehicles and Type 89 armor personnel carriers. This is a mechanized infantry company coming to take the city. So now let's zoom in right about here. So now we go here. This is a zoom in of that. So right here, you've got one of your JH7s coming by to provide, ground support for the the mechanized infantry forces coming to the town, with their armored vehicles, their infantry fighting vehicles and armor personnel carriers. You've got another one right here doing its own run, coming around to basically hit these areas here. These little red dashes are munitions that were dropped on enemy targets. Then you've got the PLL-05s, which are firing their assault gun mortars. They're 120 millimeter heavy mortars at these civilians here, this cluster of civilians. Here's an enemy here. These are moving here, and these troops are moving along with it like a rolling shield. You see how I did that? You see, look how the movement is. You see how they're moving along with it, using it as a rolling shield to move in tactically. And by the time they get here, this infantry fighting vehicle starts blasting. You've got, while that's happening, they're calling in mortar strikes across the river. You've got air strikes going on. Up here, the unit, the company broke up into its different platoons. You got a platoon here, you got one here, and you got another one off the map that you can't see because this is a zoom in of this one. So, you got the mortars hitting these civilians and these troops here, and we're going to zoom in even further on this right here. Now we're going to go here, where you could see all the individual rubbled buildings and, the blown out buildings and buildings that are still standing, like houses and commercial buildings and such. This was this wedge formation of infantry dismounts. Now they're here in the zoom in, so you can see them even, more, closer down to where, you can see the buildings individually and everything. These are all rubbled buildings. These have all been smashed and hit by air raids and mortars and heavy artillery, that was called in. So you got all these areas here. You got this major road that's going across the river. You got a park right here. Heavy mortars are coming in and saturating the park because there were armed civilians sighted by the aerial assets, by recon assets. So they called in the PLL-05s to strike the civilians in the park, which alleviates the issues for these forces here to be able to maneuver and outflank these other forces here. After they've basically annihilated them, they're going to outflank enemies that are down here. They were on this big map. So Now, this guy's driving through here. He's going to get into position here. These dismounts are coming down here. Now, what you have here is a fishhook maneuver. Now, this is one that I never really went over before in any of my work, so I'll go ahead and show how this works. Fishhook maneuver, you got two squads, basically half a platoon, or it can be bigger. And what they do is they go around like a fishhook like this. They stop and start shooting. See, these guys are moving. While they're moving and they get here, because they're both trying to close on each other, but in different ways. This wedge is coming in here, and the wedge can shoot this way or this way tactically, but these guys can respond like this. They can shoot this way and this way, and then they can move around this building here and then ambush them from here over the rubble. They can do the same. It's called a fishhook maneuver, a double fishhook. And then they could do it again, and then they come in and get these guys from the back, because these guys are here and about to, invert their wedge and go the other way, because these guys don't went around. So you see, basically, these forces here in a long drawn out, gun battle, basically a firefight, where you've got them basically maneuvering around each other, trying to get the drop on one another. But eventually it doesn't work, because once this guy's moved into position, he's going to start supporting them with his heavy machine gun, if it's an APC, or with his 30 millimeter autocannon, if it's an IFV, or maybe even the 100 millimeter cannon, which is damn near like a tank shell, or the anti-tank missiles. And these guys are moving into the area too. So, basically when this fishhook gets to here, you've got these armed civilians taking up position in the rubble. They're going to waste these guys, because these guys are untrained. These guys don't know what they're doing. They get gunned down, and then they move into position to finish fighting off the National Guard troops that were in this formation. So, as you see, imagine living in a situation like this. Well, this could be like one of your houses. When the invasion begins, this is late at night. You wake up, all this madness is going on. You hear blasting everywhere, because you got heavy mortars and heavy artillery also called in from further away. You've got airstrikes going on. You've got these enemy forces moving into position, like on the larger map here. You've got this whole company moving in. You've got this platoon of heavy mortars over here, belonging to a larger unit, of course, like a fire support company. Like in my audio book, when I talk about the Cap City battle, the battalion of Private Lee Chung had a fire support company, which consisted of the 130 millimeter rockets, and also two platoons of PLL-05s and two platoons of the 130 millimeter rockets, Type 69 or Type 63 rockets, and then one of the PLL-05 heavy assault gun mortars, because they can be used as a direct fire weapon, like an assault gun, like shoot straight into buildings or enemy targets, or they can be used like a mortar and lob a mortar, in an arc. So, you got the ground attack planes, you got the ground attack drone, the wing loom down here circling around, seeing these guys, these civilians, blasting them. Imagine trying to survive in a situation like this. These guys are totally in shock. Communications are down because the Chi-Coms knocked out the satellites and did a cyber attack in tandem with knocking out all the satellites. Club Ks begin to fly 2 hours later, timed to coincide with most of the Trojan units getting to their designated target areas to start capturing their targets, to cause maximum confusion and pandemonium. So, that's one example of a tactical situation, just zoomed in. I just drew that just because I thought it would be a really good example of different tactics on the battlefield, and show how such things would develop in like the smallest way, like down all the way to the smallest detail, where you've got different armor personnel carriers and squads like doing battle with each other, calling in fire support on them, and all this different stuff. Now, if you're in a situation like that in a city, you're already in big trouble. You're at a major disadvantage. When the lights go out, everything stops, the grid goes down, telecom, internet. You have no communication. Imagine being in a place like this. You have no communication. You have no idea that these guys are basically inbound. You have no idea that these guys are coming in to this small city. You have no idea that these are about to come and start, pounding the ground. And same thing with these, the drone down here. Nobody would have any idea of all this. Once these lights would go out, once the military network would be down, there'd be no way to communicate. Nobody would know what's going on. Nobody would know where to go, what to do. That's why I tell people to plan. plan things, plan where you're going to go, for God's sake. I mean, seriously, like, I don't think people take these things serious sometimes. I mean, I really don't, because, this ain't this, this might be like low budget artwork. I mean, but it's, demonstrating very real situations, that can and will occur. So the invasion here, you have these Trojan shock armies. You got some Russian forces. You got a North Korean corps here. You got the Second Corps of the KPA. You've got, you got the 49th Combined Arms Army of Russia. You got the 20th Combined Arms Army of Russia. You've got all these Chi-Com army and paramilitary forces like National Militia, PAP, PLA. I mean, they're all down here. They're all coming in. Yeah, Aaron, I try to make them as real as it gets. I mean, even the concept art, just to sort of give an example of, like, what sorts of things, people could see, these situations, I mean, just you could just glance at them and you could see, the even though it's artwork, you can see the realism in it. I mean, you can see, you got like smoke trail of an RPG from partisans trying to fight this, this Chi-Com, armored and mechanized infantry, force here, like the spearhead of a group. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. Go on. Go. I'm trying to do something. So you got, up in the mountains, you've got these, forces dismounting and calling in artillery strikes on partisans trying to shoot at them from the wood line. They're returning fire. They're shooting this way because they got ambushed from two different sides. So you basically got it where they cut in artillery down the hill, blasted whoever was firing at them. This guy's shooting up at a wooded hill off in the distance with his heavy machine gun. You've got these guys on the wood line. There was an attempted ambush on a scouting recon patrol, and they're returning fire and calling in artillery strikes on their enemies. So, here was the situation that occurred at Broken Bow, and my first story that I ever typed out. This is like the very first work I ever did when it came to this type of subject matter, where I typed out the Broken Bow story, and they tried to do a delaying action on the east end of town, where they rolled these cars into the way of the armored spearhead, the lead two tanks of the tank column. And, they basically popped out of the tall grasses on the other side of the cars here and the road, because there's a railroad here, and then there's a road here, and then hilly terrain here with grass. And, you can see on the edge of town, you see some buildings, you see a barn out there. What they did was they had like these homemade ghillie suits, made out of bed sheets and whatnot. They popped up out of the tall grass, threw Molotovs at the lead tanks. They all got gunned down, but they put up a good effort, and they slowed down the Chi-Com advance just long enough to keep this spearhead from getting to where it was supposed to get around the town on time, because it was going around to pincer the town. And they slowed down the lead vehicles, and they started trying to pick off the gunners of the vehicles off in the distance, on the hill over there. So they fought a delaying action here, just like they did on the other side. They did on the western side of town, to slow down the spearheads of the pincer movement around the town, so that the people could escape with as many goods as they could, as many items as they could get out of town, as fast as they could get out. And they tried to hold 259 open, the route out of town up into the mountains. They tried to hold that route open as long as they conceivably could, at least until enough people could escape and get out of the hot zone. Because you had a town full of veterans and, people that, were organized them, like the hunters and whatnot, into effective, quasi-effective, defensive forces, So you had a situation like that develop, and I'm trying to find the you had battles in the woods that, like firefights in the woods, in that story too. You had basically, here's Route 259. This was the one I made specifically for Route 259 when that little battle was going on there in the first typed out story. See, they acquired a few Chi-Com weapons, off some of the dead that they managed to get. They were trying to hold the route open as long as they can, but as you can see, the Chi-Com spearheads eventually made it around. They came with missile vehicles. They came with these missile carriers, these anti-tank versions of these WZ-551s, the WZ-551 anti-tank version, firing their anti-tank missiles. They came with their infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, and main battle tanks coming around to basically close in on the road. But they had to stop here to avoid friendly fire because there was another spearhead coming around from the other side, and they were trying to hold the route open so that people could get out. So basically, I tried to convey some of the most realistic scenarios imaginable, for when this type of thing occurs. Like even in the Pacific Northwest scenario, here's some Chi-Com rocket artillery, that pulled up and started, firing their rockets near a home here, firing at their targets. I mean, I put like a little bit of everything in here. Here's urban fighting, and here's more urban fighting. You've got a lot of different examples. I mean, I'm not the best artist, but hey, if I have to, I can throw down. Here was a highway outside of Fort Hood where they knocked out some tanks, when the columns were going up the highway, when they're going up I-35 to drive north. These were the externals, when they drove in this massively long, many miles long convoy of all these heavy group armies with all their vehicles. It was like an elongated, many dozens of miles long drive-by, essentially, because they tried not to stop for anything unless it was to pull off for fuel, more food and water, or maintenance, or ammunition, if they had to use any on the way. So, there was a lot of combat going on. The Trojans did the heavy lifting until the externals made it deep in the country before they fanned out. Like so. You had all these group armies and a Russian combined arms army and, more over there. Well, you see these spearheads came up through here. You got one going into the southeast. You got one going all the way through the middle of the country, split up the middle, like in my third story. You got one going up this way before it fans out this way. You got one going up this way. I mean, after they break through here and fight the 1st Armored Division out at Fort out there in El Paso at Fort Bliss. So after they smashed the 1st Armored Division, they just kept on going. You got Pakistani forces, Chinese forces, PAP. They all went up there. Here's a Trojan force. You had a Pakistani Trojan force. You had an Iranian Trojan force here in Albuquerque. And you had a Russian combined arms army up here in the capital at Santa Fe. So you had all these different Trojans. All the units that start out are Trojan units. Of course, you had these, bomber squadrons. You had fighter and ground attack squadrons everywhere, mostly Chinese and Russian, of course. But you had some Iranian and some Pakistani here, So basically, you had all these examples of the hypothetical invasion, and I even did the type of logistical depots. Like this one would be right off of a highway, a Chi-Com farm, right off of a highway, where they could just get off the highway, pull up into it, get all their fuel needs taken care of. Here's some rocket artillery tubes. Here's some ammunition boxes. Here's some MREs and all kinds of food and water. You had a tow motor. You got a machine gun nest to guard this way, this way, this way. They would have lots of spare parts, fuel, food, water, ammunition, artillery shells. Everything you can imagine, tools, all kinds of stuff would be stored in these barns. This would be a logistical base. You have a few shipping containers full of stuff. I mean, this type of stuff is what would be along the highways where the CCP purchased properties along these highways for the invasion routes. So, yeah, this is very important for people to pay attention to. Of course, in the second story that took place in Phoenix, because I wanted to depict an urban battle, what that would be like. Here you got some Chi-Com Z-20 utility helicopters flying over the ruins of the city. You can sort of see the smoke billowing up out of the smashed ruins. There's a few buildings that are still standing, and you got the mountains off in the background. But yeah, you basically got a lot of different things. This was the Broken Bow forward operating base when they fortified the municipal airport and turned it into a large fob, because Broken Bow was a trouble spot because the partisans there got really well organized and ended up being a thorn in the side of the occupation regime. So they started elongating the runway at the municipal airport so they could fly in heavy cargo aircraft to drop off supplies and whatnot and personnel. So you got the concrete T-walls, razor wire on top. You got the guard towers, and I know Tommy remembers these. All the HESCO barriers. All the shipping containers. Where they store all the stuff they freshly unload. I know Tommy remembers what the fob life was like, man. Yeah, remember when we would get into country and we would land at a fob just like this? I know you remember. I can't see the chat, but yeah, just like that. Yep, you land at a fob, you get off, you check in, then you get on a helicopter and you get flown out to your your main fob where you're going to be deployed at. Like here, this would have been like, yeah, exactly, Tommy, exactly. See, this would have been like Balad Air Base where we flew into Iraq and then we got on a helicopter from there and we flew all the way to Caldwell and they dropped us off there because that was our fob where we were going to get stationed at. Well, when America gets taken over by China and Russia, the fobs will be handled the same way. They'll fly in their personnel on their deployments and unload them, and they'll fly them on helicopters to wherever they're going, to whatever their duty station, their duty fob would be. They'd get on helicopters from the main fobs and fly out to their smaller fobs. It would be exactly like that, literally exactly like that. They'd do all the same things once they've taken us over. They would occupy us the same exact way. They would have their fobs and combat outposts, just like I depicted, just like on my maps, just like with the Broken Bow maps that I had, if I can find those. I have so much crap. Anyway, just like here, I'm trying to show all these illustrations because I want people to really understand what I'm trying to convey here, what I've always been trying to convey on this channel. I want people to understand, the meanings of all these things that I constantly talk about, like in my projects and my work. This is the fob they fortified, the airport that there was a municipal airport, but they built up and turned it into a fob. And this would have been where they were landing, on that fob right here, and they would have had their combat outposts. This got turned into a fire base. This used to be the Partisans' original campsite, but it got overrun by the Chi-Coms because they did a big mission to capture it, where they sent up a lot of units in the story, and they took it over. Originally, what occurred was they had all these dug-in positions, where they were dug in. If I can get this right, okay, here. They were all dug in here. You see the yellow is the underground, like the tunnels that connect all the, foxholes and trench systems. You had a trench here, underground bunker here under the ground. Here's an exit into a trench that emptied out there. You had machine gun nests. Come on, dude. Come on. I'm trying to do something. Come on, dude. And of course there were some across the 259 from there, then other trenches. And this was when the recon element made contact with them. They pulled up and did a patrol. They made contact with the partisans, with the enemy, and they had a shootout. And see all these cabins, they were stacking around the cabins, which they temporarily used to treat their wounded. These were resort cabins by the lake that they had used for their medical areas where they treated their wounded and such. But, there was battles going on when the contact forces, when the recon forces made contact, with the partisans, and they got into a battle here. They're firing RPGs and anti-tank missiles and their main armaments and, throwing Molotovs even. They lost, the partisans lost a lot of people in this skirmish, but they had 80 dead and 30 injured in this skirmish, and the recon element only lost one vehicle, and they evacuated most of the crew when they went back to the fob, because this is just a recon element. Like I said in my last video, a recon element, they thought they won. They thought they won because they fought off a recon element, when in fact their whole mission was just to figure out where they were. And when they went back to the fob, they assembled a heavy hitting force of Chi-Com paramilitary with light tanks and also Chi-Com army with, heavy mechanized infantry forces. They came back with a vengeance, and artillery support, air support, everything. So they smashed this place, and after they smashed it, there were still logistics underground, but they had turned it, the Chi-Coms turned into a fire base for most of the rest of the first story until the partisans overran it just barely, losing many in the process, but they captured a few howitzers and temporarily used them to harass the FOB, because once they got this back from a massive undertaking, they fired a few shells at the FOB. But of course, once that happened, immediately they called in for an airstrike on this. So these guys got wiped out, but they tried, they put the effort in, to get back at the Chi-Coms. But usually, if a small partisan force ever tries to get a hold of heavy weapons, it usually ends in disaster. Usually the only things that light partisan elements can get away with is ATVs, horses, maybe some pickup trucks like your technicals, they call it, where you have a pickup truck with some sort of a weapon mounted in the back, be it a mortar, a machine gun, whatever, anti-tank missile, it could be anything, but you can have a technical maybe if you can camouflage it well enough, and captured small vehicles from the Chi-Coms, like they had VP Scout vehicles and things like that, EQ 250s. They had some stuff like that, which they're we to the Gers, once they liberated some of them from this Lao guy, slave labor camp. They liberated some of the we to the Gers in the first story, and they trained them to be elite saboteurs, because the veterans that were part of the partisan element trained these we to the Gers, and they used Chi-Com ID cards and captured uniforms and a few captured vehicles that they could go into the FOB and, sabotage things. So that was a hell of a story. It was my longest typed out story I ever wrote, but it was a very long ongoing story, lots of twists and turns in it. I think it was probably, besides the second one, I would say the first one was probably the best one out of the typed out stories. But the audiobook, man, that's hitting, man. People better listen to that. People had better listen to that audiobook. I'm reading for people. There's no excuse why people aren't listening. They're not having to read or anything. They don't have to do anything other than listen to it. I did my best reading. I'm not always the best when it comes to, reading to folks, but, I think I did all in all pretty well in the audiobook, I have to say, because I do have some issues from my head injury. So I have some speech issues here and there, but, I did my best with that. Anyways, here's some other situations. In the last video rather, I went over these outdoor, regular, small unit tactics and such. Then I covered the building assault tactics here. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Tommy, and thank you, Juan, and into the fray. Yeah, so I did all these building assault tactics things I covered in the last video, my one of two. Now in 2 of 2, since I already went over all this, I don't have to go over it again, but I'm going to go over some more advanced things from the other stories, like in the second story with the Phoenix battle, the urban battle. There was a situation where there was sniper activity and landmines, because with snipers and landmines and traps, you can control large areas with a relatively small force. Well, in this suburban community, you got the street, you got some, fairly large suburban homes, 2,700, maybe 3,000 square foot homes with garages and fences and such. Well, here's a little walkway that goes between the backyards of these two. Well, inside these houses, you can see a sniper spotter team here, cover that way, cover that way, cover that way, and that way. Well, what is that? That's only 8 guys, and they have all these mines, and they even put some mines here and a few little traps here. Well, when these guys came up out of the drainage pipe, out of the sewage system under the city, if you remember Thompson, he was a cop in that story, but then he ended up with a group of armed civilians trying to get out of the city together. They tried to cross this deserty field. This is Phoenix, so it's deserty. It's just open desert. But what had occurred was that rocket artillery and howitzer artillery were used to lay a minefield, because there are munitions like that that'll actually lay a minefield for you. Some of them were hand laid, but by engineers, but most of them were laid by artillery because it was a rapid way to lay a lot of mines really fast. Well, they started going through the field. Before they even went through there, the first guy that popped his head up out of this giant drainage ditch, he got sniped, like right away. Boom, done. Didn't even have a chance. Just popped his head up a little bit. Boom. These guys were already sitting there watching, waiting. So when the rest of them got out, they decided to make a break for it. So they're running, and boom. One steps on an anti-personnel mine and does a flip and snaps his neck on the way down. Blew off his leg. Well, they didn't know that there were mines here. So when you see a quiet area where there's nothing going on, just assume that there's traps. And in the story, I taught people, if they paid attention to the characters and how they handled the situation, I taught some counter mine skills where basically they stayed on nothing but paved things, like sidewalks, like the little sidewalks that go from the driveway to the front door. They stayed on the pavement. They zigzagged back here between these fences to avoid the snipers. They went boom, 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 as fast as they could, so that these guys couldn't get a lock on them and get them, because there were a few times where they were pretty close. Like when they came out of this house in the backyard, they almost got hit by this team up here, but they made a break for it and zigzagged. And then when they got out of the neighborhood, that was when they started moving through this empty area where there was a playground, and they got through there. There was a little skirmish there. But then once they got up here, see, Thompson, he went in this drainage culvert because there was a conflict going on. You had a lot of armed civilians trying to move around and trying to escape, people that were trying to get out of the city, essentially, and going from area to area. We had all these armed civilians coming in and out of the drainage tunnels looking for a way out. They're going through the large canal. They were crossing the deserty fields. They were going through this wadi system, and a wadi is basically like a washed out area of desert. It's like a ditch, like a giant ditch or a ravine system. Well, they went through this wadi, and they came up here, and this is a warehouse / industrial park, and there was a Chi-Com armored and mechanized infantry element here clearing these out. There's a little battle going on inside this warehouse. So down here, this was a magnification of that situation. These guys are shooting at the partisans hiding out in this smashed up warehouse building. They're firing anti-tank missiles. Main battle tank, you got the infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers dismounting their troops. See, they're in wedge formation. These are in a rolling T. So they're checking up here, looking for enemies on the roof. You got these guys stacking along the wall, throwing grenades in through that giant hole in the wall that was blasted out. So, you see an example of stacking against something, and throwing grenades, over your head, over into this inside. You've got examples of wedge formations. You got the armored vehicles giving them fire support. You've got an example of a rolling T formation, 2 wedges right here, assaulting this building. One of them gets inside, as you can see. This one gets into a double column formation because they're going in after this first wedge. After they get in the door, they form into a wedge, and you see these guys are hiding behind either machinery or pallets full of goods or whatever's in here, and they're getting into a firefight. So these guys grease these guys because they're not protected by anything, and of course there's exchanges of grenades and fire from around the corners at each other. So it's pretty dynamic. You have all these situations going on in an urban situation. You've got everything from traps and snipers to, battle scenarios where you want to stay very, very low. What's that, Tommy? I mean, you can, but that's a good formation when you're going inside of a building that's got like catwalks or multiple floors that are open, like an open floor plan, or if you're outside and you're trying to look at like windows up on higher floors or on top of the roof. That's a great formation for that, because these guys on the edges, they're supposed to watch each side up top. It's a pretty good formation, especially when you have mutual support from not just your vehicles, but you got other squads, supporting you on the ground too. So you can pay more attention to what's going on up top, But you're right, though. You can, if they're not careful, you damn sure can. You got Thompson going to hide in his culvert for the night while this battle winds down. Well, that was in the second story. So these are examples of things I had in the second story, in the Phoenix battle story. And that story was a massive story. It was epic. It was a long story. Not as long as the first one, but it was pretty damn detailed. Made to show an urban situation to its fullest. Now, in the audiobook, I show a little bit of everything. I have a suburban slash urban area, which is Ann Arbor in Michigan. I have a rural area, which is the state line area of Montana and Idaho. And then, of course, I have, an urban area, which is the Cap City itself, where there was a large urban battle underway. Not the biggest urban battle in the invasion, but it was definitely up there because, they were trying to capture the Cap, so they put a lot of troops into that. But there were bigger battles, like DFW would have been a way bigger battle with more troops involved. Larger cities would have had more forces involved just by the ratio of forces to occupants in a city. You need to have a certain ratio for it to be successful. So here, this was in the third story, and this PAP force went to assault a town that was full of armed civilians that were trying to make strong points out of the high school and some other areas. Well, this was made to show some tactical movements. So you had the armored vehicles providing fire support yet again. These guys were in their wedge formations to attack. This guy had a flamethrower. He's burning this thing up. The guys firing rocket-propelled grenades. They're firing light machine guns and rifles. Here was a big ditch right here, like a drainage system, and here's the street. Now you had some APCs here. You see the little gunners in there firing their heavy machine guns in support of the guys that are lower. They're lower and they're in the ditch, so they can fire over their heads safely. They're firing an RPG. They're firing their barrel-launched grenades from underneath their rifles. Some of these guys have barrel-launched grenades. So they're firing their tube-launched grenades and some RPG fire, light machine guns, rifles, and these guys are in line formations. But when they emerge, they form into wedges, and when they got here, you see how they stacked like that. You see how they stack against the wall once they make it to the wall. So when they get out, they form a wedge and move to the wall, stack on the wall, and then they assault these guys from the side. These guys are trying to fire at them, but while they're doing that, these guys are providing the suppressing fire along with the vehicles that are firing over this way. So these guys stayed and these guys moved. And then on this side, these guys bolted here, and you see when they went in there, they did stack team procedures after they greased these guys that were guarding the door. They wiped these guys out, entered here, went in the hallway, kicked in this door. You see this guy's waiting out here, and these other guys went in. It was a small room, so they only sent in 3 guys. It was a short room. Sometimes when a room's small, you don't send in the full stack team. So they went in here, they greased this defender, they wiped him out, and then they proceeded and cleared here. So you see how this worked, overall. And there were enemies over here. This had been a situation over here that developed. You had some rubbled buildings over here, and there was a guy here who tossed a Molotov onto one of the vehicles and ended up getting it into the hatch and then cooked everything off, burnt the vehicle up. And as the PAP forces emerged, they all got into a battle, got gunned down pretty quick because some of them were on fire, so they weren't really able to, be on full alert status watching for enemy fire because they were on fire themselves. So they got gunned down. And then after that, you had these guys over here trying to fight these guys once they finally came up and stacked on the wall. So they're firing around here at these guys who are in the ditch because the ditch curves around. And then they called in an airstrike from a Q5, from a Nanchang Q5 that swooped in and dropped a few 500-pound munitions on this and blew these people to kingdom come. So you see, this is basically a lot of different tactical information. Now, this was a rural town, so this is what they tried to make a strong point out of. But the PAP mechanized forces went in and cleared it out because they specialize in counterinsurgency warfare anyway. So they were a good unit to use for this type of combat. They use them often in Xinjiang and in Tibet against restive minorities in China. So they're all like amped up and ready to go against us. They're going to be 10 times worse here. So now here's an urban battle. This was in north central Phoenix. You had people in the sewer system underground, right? They're staying underground in these underground lab sewers and maintenance tunnels and basements and such underneath the. So they used these to get around safely, sort of like they did in the Cap City battle. They traveled a lot underground to avoid all the pounding from air and artillery strikes and tank shells and missiles and whatnot. So you had these forces basically proceeding towards this strong point. This was a strong point, and you see it's getting hit by a lot of light tank shells from these light tanks and RPG fire and everything else. So they were trying to take over this strong point because they go street by street, block by block, area by area, strong point by strong point, house by house, everything. They clear everything. So what they do is they go around, surround an area, clear it, go around, surround another block, clear it. There's all kinds of ways that they can do clearance missions, but that's one way they do it. In any places that give them any trouble, they call in air artillery strikes to pound it into the ground. So, there's all kinds of examples of different things here. A lot of different artwork, a lot of concept art and maps I've made over time. So this was an overhead view of that situation here. This situation here, this is the overhead view, like basically. So you have the arrows signifying the movement. You've got forces coming here. You've got forces coming up here. So they're going to clear it. And then they're going to take the strong point. They're going to come around, clear it. Got airstrikes coming in, hitting all these rubble buildings, smashing them. So this is like a ring of rubble where a building used to be, and same here. And this was a strong point they're all hiding in, and they had access to the basement to get into the maintenance tunnels and sewers and such, so they could safely travel around. So they could either travel above ground or below ground, but mostly they traveled below ground from place to place because it was the safest way to travel. You see, here's a whole nest of partisans in this basement of this former building here. So, they traveled back and forth like this. It was the safest way. So, these are just little examples of a lot of tactical considerations, Yes, exactly, Tommy, exactly. You know exactly what I'm talking about, man. See, this is all real shit, man. I hope people have paid attention to it. Community tab story review, 96-hour invasion. If you're more into like the overhead map battles, the map battles that show entire maps of whole urban areas and cities and regions. See, here is the Battle of Richmond, Virginia, where you had the 58th Combined Arms Army of Russia basically taking it, and they had air support from the Chinese, from a squadron of J-20s that did a few different runs over the city. They were fighter jets, but they got retasked for ground combat, for ground attack missions, because they're armed with ground attack munitions, because there was no more American Air Force to contend with. So all the fighter jets got retasked as ground attack aircraft because they were armed with ground attack munitions once the U.S. Air Force had been neutralized on the ground mostly. So same with air defense units. They got reclassed as like security units for like logistical routes and such because they had no American air power to contend with either, the air defense battalions and such. So they just use them as like security elements. Yep. So this is a big battle here, with the Russian 58th Combined Arms Army was a large unit, like a Chinese group army, but like in that same weight class, but they have a little bit more people typically in a combined arms army. But that's not to say that there aren't any Chinese group armies that are really massive, because there are some very overstrength Chinese group armies, like the one I used in Dallas. That was one of the reserve group armies. It had like 100,000 people in it. That was like twice the size of a standard group army of China. See, Russian combined arms armies usually have like 55 to 60,000 in a combined arms army, which consists of a lot of subunits. Like here you had the 100th Recon Brigade. You had the 42nd Motor Rifle Division. You had the 19th Motor Rifle Division. You had units off the map too, like on day 2, the 40th Chemical Regiment showed up. You had the 291st Artillery Brigade down here. You had the engineers. You had the 31st Combat Engineer Regiment right here. I mean, this is a big unit. I mean, there's a lot of forces. There was even parts of the Russian Combined Arms Army further west that were off the map and weren't a part of this battle. Even this unit showed up on the second day of the battle because they came in from out west. So, you had a lot of different things going on. Yeah, 96-hour invasion was a hell of a thing. It starts out very primitive, because it was my first maps, my first trial and error with that concept of making battle maps. But as time went on, it got more color-coded and better and more detailed. This was the Cap City battle. Now, my main Chinese character was part of the 92nd Infantry Division, which he was part of the mechanized infantry brigade, or I'm sorry, mechanized infantry battalion that was up here. Now, he was up here fighting Americans at the end of the highway, cutting off their escape from Fort Meade. But then he got sent down here and used to come into the city, where he got into a battle right here for the bridge. If you all remember that bridge battle in part 13, I think it is. This is where that was. And then after that, they crossed the bridge, met up with these guys, came in here. They hit the first defense line, and basically the Americans finally put up some resistance at the first defense line, but they were starting like in the initial phases, the opening phases of the Cap City battle. You see how like strategically it made more sense to defeat all the installations that ring the capital, because they went down here and took out Quantico, which is the Marines and, you know, one of the paramilitary elements, the and then they took out Indian Head, a naval installation. They took out Andrews. They took out Fort Meade. They took out Fort George. They took out all these places and captured the international airport and the Leesburg airport for future use as a fob for when they occupied the Cap City. So what they did in the first 12 hours of the invasion, they took out Fort Meade, the 704th Military Intelligence Brigade. You remember Sergeant Richardson in the story? He was part of one of these battalions. You know, the place got shelled. His colonel got killed. He was a driver for his colonel, for his battalion he was in. So most of his unit was wiped out. So he escaped, went down through the woods, crossed under the highway, and then made his way into the city. When he got here, this is where he was in the park. He came up out of this ravine by the river into the park, and there was clashing and fighting going on right here, because initially they were starting to come into the city. You see how they moved in like this. They came in, they used the highways a lot when they were able to, when the highways weren't, you know, smashed from all the artillery and air attack. Air raids and such. So they used the highways. They entered the city from different points. The Pakistanis came in from down here. You had the 17th Lancers, which is like a heavy, you know, mechanized unit. They have 2 tank battalions, and they have 2 mechanized infantry battalions, and of course they have like each of their mech infantry battalions has a mechanized artillery company within it, like an artillery company that's motorized, you know, like a self-propelled guns. I mean, so you know, and they had their tank forces had a mechanized, or like basically mobile air defense, like troop defense, like a company within them. But the rest was armor and, you know, mechanized, you know, grenadier forces, infantry forces, whatnot, what have you. We had a security battalion for their headquarters and their support companies. These were like independent companies, which means that, you know, they weren't part of any of these battalions. They were like just their own companies. But this was the command elements of the whole regiment, was the headquarters company. So they started in Manassas on CCP properties that the Chinese let them, you know, use as jump off points, and they attacked from the southwest, and they took over the DOD at the Pentagon. They took the Pentagon. They took the Reagan Airport. They took all these areas. They took the CIA in Langley. They took all that, and then the Chi-Coms crossed on the Beltway on 495. They crossed the Beltway across the Potomac just to be like a reserve force. They sent one of their battalions, part of the 93rd, to be like a reserve element, and they moved into the Alexandria right here to, you know, be support if the Pakistanis needed reinforcements. But they used a lot of artillery, and they shelled the shit out of the eastern suburbs and the eastern part of the city proper, because here's like the city limits, and you have highways going through there. Well, they shelled the shit out of this area, and then the eastern suburbs held out a long time because there was a lot of National Guard forces, armories and whatnot, and installations nearby, and paramilitary forces too, because you had on the second defense line, you had St. Elizabeth's, which was like the DHS place, and they're like the biggest paramilitary force of America, so, you know, by numbers. So they had a lot of forces here, and they would go into the metro system and sewers every time heavy shelling would come in, and airstrikes from these heavy 6K strategic bombers. They would go underground in the subways and hide out. And then when it was all clear, they would come back up and start fighting the enemies that would try and press their assaults into the city, like these mechanized infantry forces and even a tank battalion. But the tank battalion came around and eventually was used to outflank them and come in this way. So they had to divide up their forces even more to stop this breakthrough, because once the first line was cracked, it was done, you know. So like they had to go back to the second line, which only went from here to here. See, the first line really snaked all the way around here like this, like so, and then down there. So but you see like how they have all these clashes. Every time you see a red line and a green line, that's where a battle was occurring, like a clash, like a battlefront. So you had this line develop right here, the first line. They punched through that. You see, they retreated from the Army hospital up there. What's it called? The big Army, Walter Reed. They retreated from Walter Reed, tried to get their wounded out, moved them behind the second defense line, which was the strongest of all three defense lines, but that fell by the end of the third day. And then finally, the last line was like the regime quarter, where you had like literally like the presidential residence and the Cap building itself was like part of the defense line. And you had basically that get overrun. And finally, the Chi-Coms declared victory and hoisted their CCP party flag and their nation's flag over all the main buildings. So this was the Cap City battle in a nutshell that was depicted in my audiobook through the two main characters, Sergeant Richardson and Private Lee Chung of the PLA. So you had these two characters showing each side of this battle, because there were three settings in my audiobook. It was like every other one was each other place. Like you would have Montana, then you would have Michigan, then you would have the Cap, then you'd have Montana, Michigan, Cap, Montana. It would go in that order. So even if you wanted to only hear the parts that had to do with the Cap, you would start at one of those parts and then just listen to every third part. So, same thing with like the Montana parts and everything else. I regret to say that there was one part I recorded of my audiobook that didn't really go all that well toward the end, and it was an important part because one of the main characters died. He got basically taken out, and the volume got really low. I mean, you could still hear it, but you really have to turn the volume up. I believe that was part, I want to say 26, 25, 26. I was up there. It was toward the end of the mountaintop battle where Bill Glass, the character Bill Glass, he got eventually taken out at the mountaintop battle where they were fighting the Chi-Com light forces, the national militia forces over the mountaintop, and they were basically in a battle, to the very end over the mountaintop, and the Americans all got either captured or wiped out, and Bill got wiped out. But anyways, that was that. And then, you had so many things depicted throughout all my work. I mean, if you're into like the strategic movements of like military forces, you would like my 96-hour invasion in my Pacific Northwest, which is just a continuation of that, but takes place in the Northwest. But 96-hour invasion shows a Florida map, basically all the subregions of Florida. It shows like a map of the Northeast, like the Virginia, Maryland, Southern Maryland area. I have a Northern Maryland map too, but that was more toward the very beginning when I was doing primitive maps, like at the very start. I have Missouri depicted. I've got all kinds of parts of America depicted throughout my 96-hour invasion, and then of course the Northwest one here. That's its own documentary. It's pretty short, but it's pretty informative. This is more about how terrain affects things as opposed to like 96-hour invasion, which is more about 96-hour invasion is basically more about how objectives affect things like cities and installations and infrastructure, and it shows how all the enemy units begin on Chinese Communist Party properties and how they lash out and go for their objectives, like they go for the jugular, like they go really fast and hard against their objectives and capture America within 4 days. Because if you begin inside of your enemy's country, and you begin like within miles of your objective, you're pretty much going to take over your enemy in a matter of days. Because of course you're going to have to fight them for a little bit of time, but you're going to overwhelm them. You knock out all their communications with anti-satellite weapons. We're talking like your DN2, DN3, FK2000, S500. The first three I mentioned are Chinese missile systems for anti-satellite weapons. And then the Russian one is the S500. They're going to use that stuff, knock out the satellites. Then after that, they're going to, or actually at the same time, rather, I'm sorry, they do a tandem cyber strike where they basically do a denial of service, like ransomware almost type deal where, instead of paying a ransom to get everything back online, they have to put a code into the system that used to launch the cyber attack, basically, to undo it. So those types of things are real. That's exactly what they're going to do. And they have electronic warfare, very potent electronic warfare systems to get all their redundant systems that the cyber attack and the anti-satellite weapon strike didn't get, because the cyber would take out the net, telecom, the grid, like the water and power, because all that's connected to the net. Anything that's connected to the net is hackable. Then the anti-satellite strike is going to take out your GPS, your military networks, your data transfers, like with all your military stuff, your satellite internet, your satellite communications, like your satellite phone networks. It's going to take out all of that. So you're not going to have any way to communicate, organize. There's going to be no organization except at the very smallest levels. Like we're talking local levels, like people that you're within earshot of, because you're not going to have a way to call them. You're not going to have any way to communicate other than maybe messengers, smoke signals, or maybe flags. If you have like some kind of flag system worked out where you can see people through binoculars waving flags to signify, things. It's going to go very low tech, very primitive when the Chinese and Russians invade. So always remember that. Here was one of the pocket battles in Montana, where you had the mountains here. See all these cabins and homes up in the mountains. You see all these air and artillery strikes coming in. You see the movements of all these dismounted forces. These are your national militia forces. They have MRAPs and armored trucks and such. These are very light forces. They'd be very, very good for mountain warfare, and you see down here on the lower slopes, down the hill, down the mountain, you've got lower elevations. You got a road kind of, going around the mountain. Well, you've got them basically cutting off the road, surrounding the mountain on lower elevation, and then they're going to drive up their, light trucks on whatever roads they can get higher up into, because they're not going to go up rough terrain and, on a mountain, but they can use the roads to bisect a pocket of resistance and then flush it out by sending in their forces going up the mountain. It would be a grueling thing, but they would have full artillery, mortar, and air support to be able to do something like that. Like in my audiobook where they're trying to take the mountain, it would be a rough fight, but you'd have these mortar guys lobbing mortars all these miles away, and because mortars have usually like a 3 or 4 mile range. You would have, here's some mortar strikes. Here's some partisan activity here. You got these forces bisecting this pocket of resistance, because you got partisans here. Got artillery and airstrikes. The orange is artillery, and this is airstrikes. The little orange is mortar strikes. And you got the vehicles bisecting it. So, I've put so many different types of scenarios. I've showed mountain warfare, urban warfare, suburban warfare, rural warfare. Just about everything. All kinds of tactical examples. Just about everything you can think of is a resource on this channel. So I also have a lot of concept art. This would be like your combat outpost with artillery. You have these Chi-Com self-propelled truck-mounted artillery pieces, these 155s. They got little watchtowers. They got a Connex that's sandbagged full of shells and powders and fuses. I remember my field artillery days. They would have a fortified ammo bunker, ammo dump, and then they'd have HESCO barriers, and watchtowers, and then here's your cannon crew members getting ready to load shells and powders and all that, firing. Yeah, the Spetsnaz team landing in my first story, doing a fast rope out of their Russian VVS Hind, because the Russian helicopters are all operated by their Air Force, the VVS, which is the Russian Air Force. In most militaries, usually it's the Army that gets the lion's share of helicopters. Every branch of service would have helicopters in any military, but usually like the attack helicopters, most of the cargo helicopters, they're like rotary aircraft are usually operated by armies around the world, but some do it a little different, like Russia. Their VS operates most of their helicopters. Of course, their Navy has their own helicopters and such, but the Army is not really the ones that operate their attack helicopters and such. That's the VVS. So you have the Spetsnaz doing a diamond formation after they get out. Got some guys in there about to go down. And up here, you've got Montana. You've got a Su-34 that just swooped down and dropped some heavy payload onto the road here, and got some partisans up on the cliff overlooking the valley with the road in it. Got some Chi-Com light tanks and APCs, IFVs. This was really difficult to do with a pen. I did all this with a pen. It was very hard to get all that detail into the vehicles like I did, but I did my best with it. You can see the turrets and tanks and all that. Even the little soldiers down there in their wedge formation, these dismounts. There's partisans over there, tank shells impacting, artillery and air hitting up there. Yeah, this concept art wasn't really easy to do by any stretch of the imagination. It took a long time to draw all of this. I even did concept art for the civil conflict documentary too that I did. So here's the JH-7, or Q-5 rather, swooping down and dropping a payload on Route 259 when everybody was trying to flee with everything that they could get, all the goods and everything they could get out of Broken Bow before the town got totally surrounded. They were trying to get up into the mountains, and this Q-5 swooped in to harass them and drop some munitions on, stragglers and get who they could, strafe the road a little bit with blasting tip ammo or AP ammo. Here's a convoy of Chi-Coms going down 259 after they secured the route, headed to the FOB. They got their trucks and everything. Yep. So, I got a little bit of everything. I put a lot of detail into all of this. Yeah. Here's a stack team, like a building clearance team, going into a building. These were the Chi-Com PAP stack teams when they were in Broken Bow, going house to house. Here you got an armed civilian hiding in that bedroom, and their stack teams tossing a grenade. The point man throwing a grenade in there. This was the People Armed Police stack team going through the houses in Broken Bow. And then when there was an urban battle, a rural town battle in the Broken Bow story, I think this was Millerton or something like that. There was a small hit and run attack where the partisans drove in on their ATVs. One had a HJ-08 anti-tank missile rigged up to the back, and they fired it at the armor, and they got guys throwing grenades at each other, firing at each other. It was a quick hit and run attack. The town's pretty much all flattened and blown to shit, on fire. Yep, light tanks, all that. And then this was in Montana before this town got destroyed. This was one of the towns. Got the Americans running over here. You got the Chi-Com stack team here, going around the corner, tossing a grenade, firing. These guys are running this way. These vehicles are going down the street, firing down into alleys and buildings anywhere they see enemy forces. So these guys are covering the movement of these guys. This stack team's covering the movement of these guys. So, yeah, a lot of tactical details and everything I've ever made. And yeah, just a lot of work put into all this, you guys. It's a shame to leave YouTube. I'm going to get off visuals for a minute so I can just have a heart-to-heart and just talk, because this is distracting me somewhat because I'm trying to look for more to get. Okay, so now I'm going to be a little more interactive for a moment. This, I put a lot of my time and effort into this YouTube thing because I really, really, really wanted to help people. I really mean that from the bottom of my soul. I really, really do. I really, it's pretty much time to get off of the tubes, though. Just the way everything's going, it's just the best thing, really, because I don't really know what else to say. I feel like I've held a lot of people's hands, as far as I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean it in the sense that I feel like I've showed people how to take narratives apart and how to see if something's a bunch of bullshit or if it's the truth, or, and most of the time media is full of propaganda and narratives and lies. And I've showed people how to take narratives apart just by using basic facts and figures. Look what I did with the Kinzhal missile, the Russian shell production and their stockpiles. When last year they said Russia was running out of shells. Oh, nope. Here it is. A year later, Russia's still shooting 20 to 50,000 shells a day. I said that last year. That post is still up. I've told people how to get through all these narratives every time they pop up, because the news is just getting crazier and crazier with all the lies. I'm telling you all, the lies just keep getting crazier and crazier. And the best way to tackle narratives is to find facts and figures to either prove or disprove something. So there's a lot of examples that I've cited on this channel of different narratives that I've taken apart. And of course, you can never ever listen to anything the mainstream media says. Anything the MSM says, just write it off as a load of bullshit. Because this is a time of war. This is a time of uncertainty. This is a time of propaganda. This is a time of over-the-top lies, like over the top. I mean, like out of control, just over-the-top lying. I mean, so there's going to be a lot more false narratives coming out that I think I gave people a good indication of how to go about proving or disproving things. So chances are, when you see the media saying something derogatory or untrue about, our enemies, trying to make them seem like they're not as dangerous as they really are, then it's a load of bullshit. Because we know what happens in prophecy, and we know what's happening in real life. In real life, it's a fantasy that a Patriot missile could shoot a Kinzhal down. It's a fantasy. A Mach 4 missile, not even quite Mach 4, almost Mach 4, a Mach 4 missile, roughly, we'll round up. A Mach 4 missile hitting a Mach 10 missile moving in an unpredictable flight trajectory. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, with a radar field of only a few hundred miles. Like that Kinzhal is going to move through that radar field so damn fast, they're not even going to have time to react and fire a missile after, or not even be able to lock onto it because it's moved through there so fast and in an unpredictable flight path. So that's a load of bullshit. That's a false narrative, and that's easily provable. So, that's one example. The shells were another example. I mean, there's just so many examples of false narratives everywhere, because what I'm noticing is a lot of sources, the best thing to do to get good information is you have to either do the type of research where you literally look at 20 different sources on one item, and you have to look at sources, you got to diversify. You got to look at sources from around the world to get a baseline, because Western sources are going to say different things than sources in other parts of the world are going to say. So you have to get a baseline, because a lot of times Western sources, because the West is a propaganda empire. So a lot of times when Western sources are going to do a depiction of a enemy, they're going to try to make them look as bad as possible, however that might be. Like with this whole Kinzhal thing, it's ridiculous. It's not even real. It's a fantasy. But they're going to try and do stupid things like that, or like the thing with Russia with their shells, saying their shells are going to run out. My God, I mean, it never ends. So they're going to obfuscate obscure information. So in order to get the best information, you need to go look at sources from around the world, and you need to get a baseline, and then you need to run information, facts, and figures through a basic matrix. Take, for instance, the matrix I do for vehicle numbers. You got to look at storage numbers. You got to look at not just storage for reserve or paramilitary forces. You got to look at long-term storage, things that have been mothballed that are still there but are put away in long-term storage. You got to look at things that have been, if applicable, things that have been destroyed in battle, things that have been destroyed and maybe put back into service because they were able to be repaired, things that have been sold, things that have been retired, things that have been added off the assembly lines. You have to look at rates of production. You got to run numbers through these matrices to get real numbers. That's how you get real numbers, not these fake, phony numbers that so many bunk sources try to give. You want to get real numbers, you've got to learn how to crunch the numbers and run it through a matrix of different, basically categories, if you will, categories of what these items are, what has occurred with these items. If they're stored, if they're still around, if they've been retired, if they've been sold, if they've been damaged in a war, if they've been damaged and, sidelined permanently, or if they've been repaired, how many are being added a year, do the production rates, all of this. That's how you get real numbers, not fake, bake, phony, bunk, baloney facts and figures. You got to get real facts and figures. And then when you have your real facts and figures from doing diligent research, you really got to do your due diligence. You can't slack off. You can't look at one or two sources or even three. You got to really dig. And I've put many years into researching these international military affairs, especially China and Russia and other associated countries. and learning about history and combining all the knowledge I've acquired and accrued over the years and learning how to use my analytical skills to put it all together to make a larger picture of what really is and what really isn't. And all the facts and figures I've provided on this channel are as accurate as it gets. And my testimony is that because I'm so heavily shadow banned and stagnated, I'm losing subscribers. They're unsubscribing people from me. I've lost like 40 subs in the last week since my last video. So check it out. Just the fact that once I started talking about the CCP and Red China, just the fact that I did that and I became stagnant all of a sudden, I was growing. I was experiencing all kind of growth my first year on YouTube. And then all of a sudden, when I start really going heavy and laying heavy into the CCP and China, I get stagnated. And then the shills began coming after me. I've made videos addressing them, if y'all remember, if y'all been with me that long. I mean, I've had Chi-Com keyboard shills coming after me. I've got a foreign government trying to come after me with keyboard, punks. So that tells me a lot. I'm on the right mark with everything as far as like my facts, figures, my scenarios, because my scenarios are only realistic fiction until they're not. Until they're not. Remember those words, until they're not. They're realistic fiction until they're not. So if people were wise, and I hope people are, it would very much behoove them to take all the resources they can and download them, for themselves, put them on like a memory stick, do something, because, I made all that work for people. It's free. You take it for yourself. Take what you feel is going to help you and be beneficial. And the best thing I can inform people on as far as what they can do with the information, because application of knowledge is what matters, how you apply your knowledge. How you understand and apply knowledge, like applied sciences. You ever hear that term? Well, this is essentially applied sciences when it comes to like the international military domain and even a little bit of geopolitical and even spiritual, because I combine the Bible combined with the Eastern and Western elites and discussing them, which is the geopolitical aspects, combined with the military international dimensions. So it would behoove people to learn how to apply these things as far as like pay close attention to, like, if you're reading the stories or the audio, you're listening to the audiobook, pay attention to all the characters and what happened to everybody and why and how and what led to these things, how these things develop. Now that's very important. How these situations develop from beginning to end, how they generally move, the mechanics of all these things. Like as far as like how armies work, how important logistics are to literally everything. Because if you don't have supplies, you will die. You will die without supplies. It's the truth. These are facts. We had a supply sergeant in the army that used to say that, but that's the most true saying I've ever heard in my life, or at least up there with them, because it is true. If you don't have caches for yourself and your family, you don't have a place to evacuate to when these things happen, because they will happen. It's just a matter of time. I can't tell you when. I can just tell you that for sure they're going to happen. It's prophecy, and the reality is lining up according to everything the word says. Jeremiah is my favorite book of the entire word, because it's literally a roadmap of our entire future. Everything from the collapse and famine to the civil conflict, which is multi-way, like in Syria with multiple factions, that I even made a documentary on that people should watch, all the way to the foreign invasion, which is like going to be like a horde, an entire horde of forces coming in here from all sides. It says all sides, meaning inside and outside and all the way around the outside. All sides. And it's like a torrent, it's like a horde, it's like a flood. Only China can provide the manpower, because only they have the industry, the infrastructure, the capabilities. They already have the forces under arms necessary to occupy a country our size that's as vast as our country. We can't even occupy ourselves. We don't even have enough personnel to even occupy. Like, we had a hard time with Iraq and Afghan at the same time, and our military was bigger back then than it is now. It was bigger by hundreds of thousands. It was like 2.5 million in total size, reserves, active, National Guard. Now it's like under 2 million. I mean, it's maybe at 2 million or right thereabouts. It's about to be less than that, all things combined. China has 29 million underarms. That's everything. They're paramilitary, they're ready reserves, they're active duty, which is also the biggest active duty military on earth besides, and then they have a large reserve force. It might not be the biggest reserve force, but their paramilitary is the biggest paramilitary on earth, and they're all combat armed and trained. So they have the most forces under arms. They have the biggest industrial base on Earth. I've gone over all this many, many times. They produce the most raw materials necessary for war production. They have the most capability to produce twice what we were able to produce in World War II, if operating on all cylinders. I mean, not just what they already have now, which is already outproduces us by a factor of 6 to 1 in virtually everything. I'm talking about like when you average out everything and like that they produce and you average out everything we produce, they outproduce us by a factor of 6 to 1 in all when you average everything out. So if they had everything going, like if they added their bus and automotive plants and other industrial sites and re-equipped them, retooled them for arms production, they could like outproduce us by a factor of 12 to 1. 12 to 1. That would double what they already can. They already have the biggest military industrial complex on Earth, outproducing us by a factor of 6 to 1. And they outproduce Russia by a factor of 3 to 1. Russia outproduces us by a factor of 2 to 1. So they outproduce us by 2. Russia outproduces us by 2. China outproduces us by 6 already. And that's without mobilizing everything for war. So the Bible is obviously describing China when it talks about not just the invasion. It's them coming with their allies, of course. They're going to have Russia with them. And, you know, Russia's the second overall most powerful after China. And then you have their other smaller allies. But I'm saying it's obviously talking about China in the physical dimension when it talks about the red dragon, the great red dragon. The dragon gave his power unto the beast. China gave his power unto the beast. Because the 10 kings are going to reign with the beast, meaning alongside of the beast. The beast doesn't have any power of his own. He has to get his power from the 10 kings because they give their power to the beast and reign with him, together with him. So Xi is going to reign alongside the beast and the false prophet for 1 hour in biblical time. 10 kings, they reign with the beast 1 hour. The dragon gave his power unto the beast. The physical is China. They have the most powerful conventional forces on earth. They have the biggest population. They have the biggest industrial base, 40% of the world's industrial base, biggest military industrial complex out of that, highest technology, world leader of AI, robotics. They have hypersonics, highly advanced electronic warfare systems. They're the only nation with a fractional orbital bombardment system. They have plasma reactors, particle colliders. They have all kinds of technology, and they're the world leader in many areas, directed energy, lasers, AI, robotics, all of that. All of that. So China with the most powerful AI, and they can put an AI inside of a robot. They have androids now. Androids. So China is also tampering with a lot of biological things, messing with biological tampering with genes and such, things they ought not be doing. So they're doing a lot of sinister things there. Obviously, Satan is going to inhabit the world's superpower, which is China. So in the physical layer, the dragon is China, but in the spiritual, it's Satan. So Satan is going to enter into Xi Jinping, and he's going to cause Xi to give his power to the beast and reign together with him for 1 hour. China has the most gold holdings on Earth, most industry, most forces under arms, conventional forces, most advanced means of delivering nukes, third biggest nuke arsenal, but the most advanced means of delivery with fractional orbital bombardment. It's like taking hypersonics a step further than they already are. They also have regular hypersonics, which are plenty advanced. You know, they're very, very powerful. And the West likes to play around with its thumb up its ass, pretending like China and Russia aren't these massive, major, giant powers, especially China, but also even Russia. It's not wise to play games with Russia either, because Russia is single-handedly bleeding NATO of everything it has, practically, in terms of like ground capabilities. All the ammunition sent, not to mention a large amount of systems coming from Western and Eastern European nations that are NATO members that we have to replace, by the way, that's coming out of our stocks. So, and we're also giving our stuff directly. So it's bleeding us white. It's bleeding us dry. So how is the West supposed to take on China, who hasn't even done anything yet, who outproduces the entire collective West combined? I'm not the only one that's ever said that. That Duran channel, when I found them, I noticed they were saying that too. China outproduces the EU and USA combined. How are we supposed to take them on? And they haven't even done anything yet. And Russia's bleeding us dry, and they're the second most powerful nation on earth. They're fighting in a war of attrition. Just because they didn't fight it the way most Americans assumed they would, doesn't mean that they're not doing something insanely effective, which, they're bleeding the West and the proxy country dry. They can't continue forever. They're going to run out. They're going to run out of everything: weapons, ammunition, forces. I mean, my God, they're using boys and old men, geriatric brigades. I mean, it's going to end at some point. They've been doing this since like last summer. They've been using old people and young people to fill in spots on their lines because they're running out of trained professional troops. So what the best they can hope for is to send some of these battalions over to Britain or Germany, or maybe even here. I'm not sure if they're coming here too, but I know for sure there's training them in Britain, Germany, and the Czech Republic. They're trying to train up new battalions, but they only give them like several weeks of training. What the hell is that? What good is that going to do? I mean, it's better than nothing, but I mean, what are they going to do against a hardened, massive, well-trained Russian military that's grinding them down, that hasn't even used the vast majority of their forces they built up yet? Hundreds of thousands of forces, massive amounts of artillery and tanks, mechanized infantry swarms, air defense, they haven't even used yet. They're just sitting in Belarus, in Belgorod, in Western Russia, in the southern parts of their new territories near Crimea. They're just all sitting there. They haven't even used them yet. They're still using the original limited incursion forces with very minor backup from some of the other units, but they haven't even fully committed all these massive reserves into the battle yet. So what is the West supposed to do? We're having this hard of an issue with Russia. What are we supposed to do when China jumps in? It's over. That's the war that'll literally end, like in my audiobook. That is when all our cities are going to look like Berlin in 1945. Battle of Berlin. They're all going to look like that. They're all going to look like Berlin, Dresden, Stalingrad, like St. Petersburg after the Germans, for like 2 straight years and dropped, munitions on it for 2 straight years during the siege. Our cities are going to look like that. All of them. They're all going to be smashed. This country is going to be smashed into the dust heap of history. So why do people think that I do all this? This is why. Because I know these things are real and they're coming here. People can either choose to acknowledge it or not, They can choose to acknowledge it or not, or they can live in their fool's paradise, Wagner's basically like the Russian Foreign Legion. Like they recruit foreigners, but it's like the French Foreign Legion, how they also recruit foreigners, but they have to pledge their loyalty to France. It's sort of like that. Wagner uses a lot of old Russian army and also foreigners like Syrians and, also internal peoples like Chechens, like from the autonomous regions in Chechnya, And I mean, the Wagner group is pretty hardcore. I mean, it's a paramilitary force, it's pretty well armed. It's, very well trained, very well disciplined. They've been used in covert activities. I mean, they pledge their loyalty to Russia. It's basically the Russian Foreign Legion, might as well be. So it's not really a PMC. It's just they call it that because they had a shell company when the GRU, which is the Russian military intelligence, or the GRU and the FSB got together. They created a shell company called Wagner, but in reality, it was just a way for plausible deniability to do wet works overseas with very highly capable, very well-trained paramilitary troops. They have other types of paramilitary too, but they don't have very large paramilitary, but they have a few 100,000 paramilitary, about 300,000, what they used to call internal troops, which are now called the National Guard in Russia, which are like under the Ministry of the Interior, but they're paramilitary, but they're militarily trained and equipped, if that makes sense. It's like the PAP or in China or the national militia, which is like home defense. It's basically what the internal troops are in Russia, but they've been using a few of them. I've noticed a few of those battalions were on the map too. I guess they were providing like support or something, or filling in, like being used as like a filler unit on the map. But I noticed that early on some of the maps, there were National Guard forces from Russia on the map, along with Army and these Wagner forces. So basically, what's the West going to do? What are they going to do? what's going to happen is everything is going to look exactly like in my hypotheticals, exactly like in my scenarios. I hope people paid very close attention to it. So I'm going to interact with the crowd. We should have a good conversation about now. People should be wanting to talk about all these great topics, because that's why I came on here. I had a lot to say, and I hope other people do too, because this can end up being a very good, very enriching, conversation. So let me see what everybody's saying. Yeah, Tommy, they do. They are. Some of them that have like life sentences, they commute them if they'll agree to join Wagner. It's sort of like when we wanted to recruit people in Iraq that had criminal records, like back when we relaxed the army standards and let some people come in that had like minor felonies and things like that. It's sort of like that. The Russians are like doing that, but like for Wagner. Yeah, and yeah, let me see. Yeah, they're doing that though, Tommy. They are. Let me see. Yeah, and you're right, Tommy, about that, about the whole woke thing, man. It's already gutted our armed forces. They're and not only with that, with all the stuff we've given away, not just what we left behind in Afghan, Iraq, and what we've tried to arm different factions in the Syrian civil conflict with, and it's not just all that. It's especially this massive black hole in Eastern Europe. We've given so much away. There's not even training ammo for certain systems now anymore. They can't even train like for man portable air defense systems, anti-tank systems, things like that. They're so low on ammunition. They have to save it for a war situation because we're that low and we can't replace it fast enough. It would take us decades to replace all the artillery shells, the rocket artillery, the 270 millimeter rocket artillery that goes to the HIMARS and the MLRS, the M270. That we'd have to replace. It would take years, decades to replace that because it takes in 1 year. It takes a year to produce 250 270 millimeter rockets, and same with Patriot missiles. Did you know that it takes a year to produce 250 of them too? So all of this ammunition, you cannot fight without ammo. It doesn't matter if you have vehicles. If vehicles have ammo, no. Well, then you're not doing nothing. Do your vehicles have fuel? Can they go anywhere? Oh no. We're our strategic reserve is like basically almost bottomed out. I mean, we're dependent on foreign imports of fuel. That provides half of our fuel consumption of our whole country. Our whole country, if you tried to run America on half of its current fuel consumption, like if it's like, if you took our fuel consumption, cut half of it out, just took half of it away suddenly, you're not going to be able to make it on the other half. The rationing would be so severe that people wouldn't be able to go anywhere or do anything. You wouldn't be able to do any traveling. The fuel would be ridiculous. They'd ration it, or it would be so expensive that you wouldn't be able to afford it. And they'd probably take some of it for the armed forces just because it'd be that dire of an emergency that if a war did happen, they'd at least have to have a little bit of something. But even then, it wouldn't be enough. If you don't have logistics, your army's not doing a damn thing. You have to have spare parts. You have to have maintenance facilities. Oh, what happens when we get in a conflict with Russia and Russia starts firing all kinds of calibers and other cruise missiles all over Europe and hitting our maintenance facilities, our installations, all our vehicles that are out in the open? I mean, hitting command and control bunkers, hitting communications centers, and hitting air bases and all that. What happens when they take out the airfields? American aircraft are built, or they're not built to take off from rough airfields. They're built to take off from paved airfields. So that would be a nightmare. So you're not going to use your Air Force. So we get in a conflict with Russia. They can hit everything we have in Europe. It's not a problem for them. They can hit everything we have here too in our own home country. China and Russia have the means to be able to hit us anywhere. So when we get in a conflict with them, they're going to take all our communications out with their anti-satellite weapons and their cyber attacks, and then they're going to use their electronic warfare Trojan units as redundancies. They're going to blanket everything with electromagnetic interference, or other interference. So it's going to be a horrible situation to try to operate your forces in. I mean, it's just going to be a degraded atmosphere for communications. You're not going to be able to communicate unless it's very, very local, like in my stories. People, there was no draft because there wasn't time for a draft. There was just no time to do anything. The most you could hope for was to organize into partisan groups or whoever was already called up. Like if you had guard units that were called up for training on like one weekend, okay, cool, you already have them because they're already there, but you're not going to be able to call up everybody like suddenly when there's no communications, there's no nothing. How are you going to get people places? How are you going to organize them? You're not. like in my audiobook, everything was done very local. Everybody locally had to take initiative, and the people that didn't take initiative got wiped out immediately because they didn't know what to do, where to go, where the enemy was coming from, what was even happening. They didn't know anything. Try and imagine that for a second. Imagine yourself it can be anywhere, in your own home. Imagine yourself in your home. Everything goes dark. Nobody knows what's going on. You have no idea where enemy forces are going to come from, in a situation like that. You don't at first, you're not even going to know there's an invasion until the enemy shows up, until they're right on top of your head. You're not going to know. And you're not going to know where they're going to come from because you're not going to have any way to, look out there unless you have scouting parties already designated to do that sort of thing where they, go out a ways from your town or wherever you're at, and then they come back and report to you if they see any movement. That would be the most primitive way you could, figure out, where you could ascertain where enemies were coming from. But most people don't do that because most people aren't organized in any way, shape, or form. So it's I try to show all these things through storytelling, through the audiobook, through battle maps to show how things move from an overhead view, from a strategic level view. I try to show people how all this stuff works so that they can hopefully take the information, keep it for themselves, learn from it, and take it and run with it, and do something with it. Make better emergency plans out of that by knowing what to expect. If you know what to expect, like they used to say in G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle. Well, if you know what to expect, you can make better plans. You're not going to be like 90% of the dumbass Americans that don't know what the hell is going on and just get, overrun, get taken as, God knows what, prisoners, whatever, slaughtered. You're not going to be like those people, or the reactionary idiots that just run out there looking for trouble and get wiped out because they get seen before they can even pull the trigger. That's real, that's going to be a lot of that happening. I tried to depict that in my work too, so this is all very real stuff. People better take it to heart. I'm serious. I tried my best to help people. I really did. I did it from the bottom of my heart. I tried to really help people. It's my kingdom work, I really did. Yeah, and that was part of my civil conflict documentary. Remember, Tommy? The La Raza narco state coming across the border and taking territory? That was part of my civil conflict documentary during also when there was food stamp riots and collapse of benefits and everything. Chicago food stamp riot. All of that was in my documentary. My civil conflict work, my 5-part docuseries is excellent on that. It really is. It shows from beginning to end how that would look. And at the very end, it mentions that the Chinese and Russian invasion begins right when that ends. So it just mentions it. It doesn't, of course, I don't go into it because it's strictly about the civil conflict. I just mentioned that as the civil conflict winds down, China and Russia invade right after, while we're already pretty much decimated ourselves, ripped ourselves apart, made it even easier for them. So they lose even less people than they would. Even if they attack now, they'd still have a decisive victory. It would be decisive. But even in a decisive victory, you still lose some things, even if it's minuscule, you're still going to lose, life. They're trying to lose as less life and equipment and money as possible. That's why it's like in the art of war. If you see your enemy destroying himself, let him. It just makes it easier for you. So, yeah. Pardon me while I have a cigarette here. So what's everybody saying? I'm sorry, I got on a tangent again. Oh, good. This is a good 2-hour stream. I was hoping this would be a 3-4 hour stream. Oh, yeah, no problem, Sasquatch. No problem. Absolutely, Tommy. Absolutely. I have a lot of good work on this channel. I really pray people take advantage of it and save it for themselves, keep it, it's the typed out stories, copy it, paste it on your own stuff. I don't even care. It's all free. Just use it in its original context. That's all I ask. Just out of respect for all the work I put into it, just keep it in its original context. Learn from it, So, yeah, Rose, it's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to go anywhere and get away from what's coming. It's going to be horrible everywhere. It's just going to be really horrible here. But, it's not going to be much better in Mexico. Trust me. It's not going to be better. There's no escape. You're just going to have to bite. You're just going to have to bite the, proverbial bullet, and you're just going to have to toughen up. You're just going to have to, learn from information like what I've provided. You're going to have to, put it into practice. You're going to have to learn about field sanitation. You're going to have to learn about, emergency, first aid. You're going to have to learn about, being able to carry your own weight, both literally and figuratively, because you are going to have to carry a lot of weight around, because there's going to be a lot of people that end up on foot. I hate to say it, but you're going to have to prioritize what you carry based on what I said earlier. Where are you going? How far is it? What type of areas are you going through? Is it a hostile area potentially, or is it generally an area that's, vacant that you can easily get through? I mean, how far is it? How much are you going to carry? It's really going to be up to you. And it's because I don't know everybody's area. Everybody's going to have to make their own plans for themselves, because I don't, I can't get into everybody's head and make plans for them. I wish I could, but I can't, because I don't know everybody's area. I don't know everybody's circumstances. I don't know what everybody has as far as equipment. I don't know, that's all on you all. But I tried to show examples of what works, what doesn't, and why. And I showed it through the guise of characters and storytelling and everything. So, again, I suggest people take advantage of all the work on this channel. Remember, all the best work is in the playlists, but also if you look in community, there's also a lot in community. My typed out stories are further back in community. So is a lot of my concept art that actually has captions with it that tell you what each picture is depicting, as far as the concept stuff goes for both the civil and the foreign invasion stuff. So if the further back you go, you'll finally hit my invasion stories. I have 4 of them. One's really short. One's literally only 2 parts. It's the fourth and final one. But then the rest are pretty long. They get the further back you go, the longer they get. My first story is the longest, and my second story is the second longest. I think the first 2 are the best, but the third is good. But the third is strictly from the enemy perspective as they're invading. But the fourth one is also from the enemy perspective, but it's a special forces team dispatched to, eliminate a partisan leader, a high-value target, as they call it. So you can use a laptop or PC if you choose to read, but remember, I had to do a lot of abbreviations and purposeful misspellings. I misspelled things on purpose because I've had story parts taken down where I've had to redo the whole thing, and I had to misspell words, and because YouTube's a bunch of bullshit like that, but there's censorship. But anyways, most of my best work is in playlists. I have my 96-hour invasion. I have my continuation, which is the Pacific Northwest, the new documentary Pacific Northwest. I have the community tab story review, which goes with the community tab stories I typed out. It's best to have a laptop or PC to go back and read those, because you can scroll back easier, and you continually do that to read each part. It's much easier than with a phone. I mean, you can do it with a phone, but it's annoying. I've done it. It's not fun with a phone. But anyway, the audiobook, that's very, very long, but very worth listening to. Very worth listening to if you're not much of a reader. Listen to the audiobook from beginning to end. You might have to break it up and listen to it in a few days, maybe several days. You might even listen to, a few parts each night or however you want to do it. But it's pretty long, but it's worth listening to beginning to end. I did my best because it's not easy to read to people, hold the phone, and, scroll on a laptop, which is basically like my word processor since I don't have any internet on it. So anyway, put a lot of work in on this channel, and it's been fun, you guys. It really has. I mean, it's been good getting to know everybody. I mean, I'm not completely gone. I mean, I'm just not making any more videos here. Now, I'll be a guest on other channels. Anyone that invites me, I'll be glad to be a guest on other channels. I'll do community posts, but as far as making video content, I think I've done everything I can do for people. I mean, really, I have. I mean, I've showed so many things here. People just have to use it. There's no sense in me making new things if people haven't even looked at the old stuff I have. I've got months worth of stuff for people to keep them busy. It's timeless, meaning it's applicable yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So you can look at that stuff anytime, and it's always going to be applicable. It's always going to be, worthwhile to look at. So going back and using those resources is always a great idea. Well, thank you, Tommy. Yeah, I'll still be around. I'll answer any questions, comments people leave me on my videos. Preferably leave them on new videos if you want me to, be able to see it and get back to you. If you have like a comment or question, that you want answered, I'll answer them. Just leave it as a comment on a video or on a community post, and I'll get back to you as soon as I see it. I'm not completely gone. Of course, I'm going to use my channel to look at other videos and, be a guest on other channels or, leave community posts every so often, but I'm just going to be done making videos because I think I've done enough with video content. I really have. There's just so much on my channel people can use. Even my shows I've made. I made miscellaneous and Friday show playlist with all kinds of shows, with all kinds of facts and figures in it that I regularly updated as time went on, as things changed. Because sometimes facts and figures change, and sometimes you got to update them, because things get added, things get taken away, so on and so forth. You know the deal. So I've done my best to always keep people well updated, and again, it's been great. I've really enjoyed all my subscribers. I really mean that. I've done all this to really help everybody, and I really hope I have. I hope I've helped somebody. I really do. And if you feel like this material is going to help you and your family to make better plans and hopefully survive, again, I can't guarantee everybody's going to make it because everybody's not going to make it, but this will give you more of a chance than your average fool who's living in their fool's paradise, who doesn't prepare, doesn't plan, doesn't learn about vital information that they can use to, applied sciences. Yet again, applied sciences. You take what you learn and you apply your knowledge. You use that knowledge to do things with it. You apply it. You use it to better yourself. You use it to make your own emergency plans that are more effective than either doing nothing or having a plan that was based on falsehoods and misconceptions or bad, news or fake news, fake facts and figures. You want to have the best possible information. It's basically intelligence and analytics. You're using intel and analytics at its best to make the best possible planning you can make for yourself to be able to hopefully navigate all this BS that's coming. That's what it's all about. Navigating it, getting through it. You're never going to stop it, but you can wade through it. That's what it's all about. It's all about navigation. You can apply your knowledge, you can make real plans, or you don't have to, or you could just, play games and, win stupid prizes, it's all up to you. It's all on people, like I said, I didn't mean it in a derogatory way, but you can only hold people's hands for so long. Eventually they gotta, it's like with training wheels, you gotta take the training wheels off eventually. And people, it's like with false narratives. I tried to do that by showing people how to debunk false narratives and showing people how to, do things with examples and storytelling and, battle maps and all this other stuff. So many examples, I just hope people take it and run with it, take it and use it, save it, keep it, put it on your computer, go take notes if you have to, if that's what it takes for you to memorize and learn things. Do what you got to do. This is for you. I already know all this. That's why I made it. If they scrub my channel, it's not hurting me, but it might hurt people that need this information. That's why I'm urging people to save whatever they feel is going to benefit them. I don't care what it is. Save the shows, the shows, the Friday shows, miscellaneous shows. Save the 96-hour invasion, the Pacific Northwest, the community tab story reviews, the audiobook. All of it, the civil conflict docuseries, which was really good. I even enjoy listening to that one time and time again, like I've said before. It's, and I'm just doing stuff around the house. It's really cool. It's a really cool docuseries, the way it came together. It mixes the best of storytelling and, battle maps and visuals. And, there's even a special operations mission later in it in the last video. I put atrocities in it, economic data, leaders. I even made leaders. And these were based off of, these could have been real people with real jobs, real everything, real dynamics, real ideologies. I based it on everything real. So It's incredible, all the parallels you can draw from everything that's happening right now to everything I put in that civil conflict docuseries. It's all happening right now. Same with the invasion stuff, as insofar as, like, take Private Lee Chung, for instance, and his deployment, as a Trojan, in this country before the war began. I mean, that's happening too. That's been happening for decades, and it's just now getting attention because of the crisis that's occurring. We had the same crisis back in 2020, if you all remember correctly. I went on a rant about this in a short video I made a long time ago. Those of you who have been with me that long, yeah, I ranted about the whole border things. It was going mad, back in 2020, and now here we are again, happening again. See, this has been going on a long time, so it's the same old shit, but eventually it's going to hit a crescendo, and shit's going to get really ugly, and that is why I feel like I've pretty much, given all these resources that people should be able to take and run with. I mean, use them. Seriously, that news cycle is not going to help you, but this type of information here, this will help you. This will help you. You can learn vital information about field sanitation tactics, logistics, nomadism, semi-nomadism, cache sites, and, types of preps needed. I mean, everything. I mean, there's all kinds of information in this stuff. Just pay attention to it. There's tactics, there's strategy, showing how, the mechanics of armies work, how everything comes together from air power, sea power in some cases, where I had like coastal areas and land power and all the different elements of armies come together, and how logistics affect everything, all the mechanics and intricate details of how armies work. I've shattered a lot of misconceptions with this work. I should have anyway, because I've showed how the reality looks versus the misconception, because you have a lot of people out there talking about this military stuff, and they have no idea what they're even talking about. Seriously. It's like this whole Kinzhal Patriot thing. It's like, it just makes me want to roll my eyes because it's so ludicrous. It's fantasy. It's insane. People don't even know what the hell they're talking about. They're just parroting things from the MSM, the Mockingbird mainstream media. Stop getting news stories from the MSM. Please, everybody, don't go to the MSM for anything anymore. It's all bunk BS. It's all lies. They just get more outrageous as time goes on. They really do. Yeah, of course, Sasquatch. Of course. Yeah, that's a given. I mean, you stay alert, you stay alive. It's like we used to say in the Army, stay alert, stay alive. And you're really going to need that with the world that with this coming into focus. Oh, yeah, no problem, Censored Cactus. I don't think I've seen you here before, or it's been a while, but welcome. Everybody, welcome. I'm always glad. Like, I really do. I appreciate it. I love all my subscribers. I think you all are great. I really do. I think everybody's great. I just hope everybody really, takes all this information and does something good with it. Save it, keep it, share it with people. I mean, if you think it's going to benefit somebody, open up to them and share it with them. I mean, tell them, say, this stuff is real. This is coming. You can learn from this. You can, make realistic planning based off of some of this information, because this is hypotheticals, like ultra realistic hypotheticals that are trying to, shine a light on this scenario so that we understand what these things look like, how they mechanically move and work, so that we can hopefully get ahead of it and not get run over by it. So we can step to the side, sidestep it, move out of the way, navigate it. That's what all this information is all about, so that you have a better idea of what to prepare for and how to do it and what works, what doesn't work, and why. And you can learn all of that from all this information. All of that. Thank you, Tommy. And thank you, Aaron. Hey, you have a good night, Aaron. Yeah, well, Rose, it's you still got to prepare. You still got to have a way, because there's if God wills it, there's a way for you. There's a way for you. So if anybody has anything else they'd like to say, I'll speak now or forever hold your peace. Well, thank you, Into the Fray. Thank you. Exactly, Tommy. Integrated air defenses. That's what Russia has, and China too. We really don't have that. We have like scattered, like small scale, like low level air defense. we could do a lot better in that area, basically. Yep. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Juan Munoz and Roger Dodger and Ken and everybody that showed up. Thank you. All right. Well, I guess I pretty much covered everything. I mean, this was pretty much a heartfelt farewell. So, again, I really hope people really, take what they need out of that work. And, a lot of effort was put into making all of that. And, it was all to convey the harsh reality of what's coming. There's not going to be anything easy about what's coming. I mean, everybody should understand that. And everybody should at least do their best, put in a real effort to try to survive what's coming, to navigate it. And you can better do that by, learning as much as you can, not paying attention to this bogus news cycle, but actually getting practical information that'll, educate you on how these things move. Because, instead of watching a news cycle, you should be getting ready to navigate a world war situation and a foreign invasion. You should be getting ready to navigate an internal conflict, multi-way internal conflict. Why watch a news cycle? We already know what's going to happen. There's no sense in watching the news. You already know what's going to happen. You already know America's going to collapse. You already know there's going to be a multi-way civil conflict. It's all in prophecy. It's all in Jeremiah and other books, but especially Jeremiah. You already know there's going to be a famine, collapse, then there's going to be a multi-way Syrian-style civil conflict, and there's going to be a foreign invasion. So that's it. Those are the things people should be preparing for. Now, if you can get through that and miraculously, survive all of those things, then you know what? You just might make it to the very end where, in a twinkling of an eye, at the Battle of Armageddon, by about the time that occurs, you'll be changed in the twinkling of an eye if you make it to the very end. But that's what we can all hope for, is to endure till the end. Navigate all this. You got to try and navigate it to the best of your ability. Sidestep it all to the best of your ability. If you believe in God, He'll be with you the whole way. So, I really, really appreciate everybody. Well, thank you, Tommy. And, again, everybody's always welcome to, comment or ask me questions. I mean, I'm still going to be around. I'll still be making community posts here and there. I might be a guest on other channels, but as far as making my own videos, I'm hanging it up. The only way I'd ever even consider coming back would be very short, just to do that Texas map, which would take a minute. But I mean, I don't think I'm going to do it. I don't know. But this is my last planned video, so I mean, if I ever come back and do that, it'll be like a spur of the moment type decision, But yeah, I've done pretty good. I had a good run at it. I've done some good on YouTube for people, so. No, I hope people take it and use it and take full advantage of it, because a lot of people aren't going to get this information. Like I said, the moment I started talking about China and the CCP, I got shadow banned heavily. I stopped growing. My channel stopped growing. Started having lots of shills coming out of the woodwork, CCP shills, keyboard warriors. They're little, COINTEL Pro keyboard army. Goes after people that, talk about them. Yeah, and I've been stagnated. So a lot of people are not getting this information, and this could help a lot of people. But this tells me that my information's basically on point. Some of the best out there from this heavily shadow banned. So that in and of itself is a virtue. So I'll leave it up to my subscribers to share things out they feel will help other people, because it's all here. It's all free. Take what you want from it. I love everybody. I love all my subscribers, everybody. I really, really thank you all. I wouldn't even charge a red cent for this. I'd feel dirty for that. I've never asked for money, never would ask for money. Yep, I would never do that. So it's all free. Use what you will. And God bless all y'all. May Yeshua bless and keep you all. And again, I'll still be around to answer questions, comments, and do community posts here and there, but I'm hanging it up with videos. So I love all y'all. Thank y'all for coming. Y'all be blessed.